just my time. Yeah.
I know.
Brody remoting it?
No, not that I know of.
You know, I left my work at 5 o'clock. And it's 30 miles away. I was going averaging 40 miles an hour.
They the first one on YouTube.
Or what? Did you say are you the
You
first
shot
one?
Travis the other day.
Yeah.
The stream is live right now.
Cassie, do you want to introduce them or just turn it right to them?
I can, whatever you want. I can introduce them if you want.
They're the ones that requested.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Or like separately. Okay. Yeah. I'll test it.
Getting this notice that our Dropbox is almost full.
Noah, how you doing?
Hey, what's up, Doug? Doing good?
I like that shirt.
It's new. Thanks. Shake called it a cowboy shirt.
So
I wasn't aware that it was a cowboy shirt.
Because
I guess I spoke it out,
like a
cowboy.
large amount of things
Say y'all.
big.
Well, the top seaming does give a little bit of that, but
Western blur.
it doesn't have like pointed bottom pockets. You're okay. Yeah. I like Western shirts anyway, so I don't care.
You know, I've never been able to pull off a cowboy hat, I will say.
No?
I have one,
See what happens.
but I
just
can't bring myself to do it.
just wear it more often.
I said that we should
I'm
switch
pretty
over
solid
to
suburbanite, so.
what's the Microsoft one?
Not that one, or
My
sure.
family
One
lives
drive.
in Star Valley, Wyoming.
That's where,
But
like
it's only around
internally,
5
that's what we
acres,
all
so.
use.
That's what I
It's
thought.
not like I'm a
Why would you
rancher.
do
I
it?
feel like a poser if I wear a cowboy hat.
OneDrive you get like 120 gig.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have
We
plenty of
already have
storage
that,
in
right?
OneDrive.
Yeah, I mean it's on all the things.
Okay, why are we getting the echo?
I wonder if it's just, maybe I'll ask them to turn off their microphones.
It's not,
Someone has
not
this
a
on
big deal.
speakerphone.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello, Lisa.
Hello. I've been listening in and I found a way to hack into all your phone lines and keep this going without you knowing.
Oh, you're connected
I'll
there.
just turn it down on that.
Okay.
I don't see UTA.
No.
Excited for that his freshness. This is truly the fewest people we've ever had. This is weird.
Yeah.
It is odd.
Yeah,
It's 6 o'clock.
I found Brody.
That's where they started.
Found me? Yeah.
yeah.
We have a good feedback, so whatever we say, we can hear it, so we can like approve the minutes as we go.
4 times.
4 times.
Lisa and Dave, do you guys
Hi,
have your
hi,
phones
hi.
muted?
How many were there?
Hang on, guys. Cassie's trying to talk to her.
Sorry.
Hello?
Cause it might be because we have those speakers and there's feedback between those two.
That's what I'm thinking.
And Lisa and Dave, do you guys have your phones muted?
Mine's not.
Will you try muting it? We're just getting some weird echo, like feedback here.
Sorry.
Mine was muted, but I'm going to stay on mute unless I need to say something.
Okay, great.
Now everybody's quiet. Oh, no.
It's echoing.
Bananas.
Yeah, that's still
I wonder if people are out front.
Oh, I'm thinking it's in the chambers?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm gonna check out front.
Good idea.
Oh yeah.
It's gonna be an interesting. I don't wanna cough now.
Do we need these?
Hi, Robert. That would be better if we.
How you doing?
Good.
You know, we found a water main by your parents' house.
Oh, they were telling me.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, they, the man had it somewhere different. dad says he and his neighbor were telling you guys right over here.
Closed.
I didn't know that, yeah. No,
I went out and
so
opened it.
all of our maps, all of
One of
our,
them was like
the original plans showed it going through that little sidewalk, cut through. That's where we believed it was, so for all these years. Now we're doing this 1625 project. We replaced the whole water main, and we had to cut off to abandon the line. Like, where does this thing go? Finding it going north, which is.
Cassie, let me know when you're ready.
Right about it.
But now you got some sidewalk to fix.
Yeah, that's all right. It's just a little section. Not too bad. At least it could have been worse. It could have been like digging up all this other sidewalk through the cut through.
Yeah.
So, the reason why my dad knew where it was is because as long as we've lived there,
Video
there's
conference is
been
in the
a
same room
sink,
as our stream, so the
sinkhole.
stream is picking it up.
Oh, really?
all
on top
through
of the
there.
video.
Yeah, that
So that's why
section
you're
of the
gonna get
sidewalk,
flooded.
and then you don't see it in the road, but then you see it over and then the parking lot. And the
You walking
sidewalk
on
at
fish,
the
you must be
park.
fat.
I am.
Okay.
I
See,
saw my
we
name.
saw the
Oh,
sinkhole.
good. How's
We thought that maybe that was an old original service.
We'll have
to
you
the
sit down at this
before
laptop right
second
here,
water main.
right at the
Oh,
table.
okay.
And we've got it loaded so you can just control it yourself.
Okay,
And who
that's
knows
great,
what
thank
it
you.
was, but
We're
yeah, I
having a
remember
little
it as a kid.
thing that they're trying to resolve.
Especially
No,
when
it's
it
just
was
a different color as well.
the early ones,
Yeah.
the curb came down like that. So you have to go right up there on our bike.
Remember that night?
Nice. Yeah, that's funny.
Oh, everything went quiet.
What did you do?
Unplug the speakers.
Oh, well, there you go.
One's tweeter.
Oh.
I'm throwing them at people.
Lisa and Dave, can you still hear us?
They're all on, they're answering you, but they're all on mute.
See, it's up to you now. We're not echoing.
We don't have an echo now.
Whoa.
Are you still in it for Garrett?
Yeah.
Yep. It's our
We had a third recording audio.
Oh, so
Is there
it's
still?
good.
There is something on the agenda.
Oh, my chance.
Oh, sorry.
I can just stay on mute until I need to speak.
Yeah, that's great.
Best.
Okay.
We ready?
All right.
Okay, let me call us to order. This is the work session of the Syracuse City Council for September 24th, 2019. We're beginning just a little late. We're being joined by two members of the City Council who are remoting in. We have remoting in Councilwoman Bingham and Councilman Mon. Here is a quorum consisting of Councilwoman Bolduc and Councilman Savage and Councilman Peterson. Let me call this meeting to order. I'm going to ask Councilwoman Bolduc if she would lead us in prayer, and then Councilman Peterson if you would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Our Father in heaven, we thank thee that we can gather together as a city and do our best to take care of the business before us. We pray, Father, for thy inspiration and guidance as we try to honor the citizens and the law and what is best for our future. We pray, Father, for thy help and all these things, and say this humbly in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Please stand.
I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for doing that for us. We're at the point in our agenda where we set aside some time for public comment. There will be a time that we'll set aside here at the beginning for public comment, and then there'll be another public comment down just before we close the meeting. If some other issue has stimulated something that you'd like to say to the council, we are in our bylaws obligated to follow Robert's Rules of Order. We'd ask you to state your name and place of residence, and then we'd ask you to limit your address to 3 minutes or under. And therefore, I would now open it to public comment. If you have something that you'd like to address the city council on, we'd love to hear from you. Keith?
Yeah, I spent far too much time in front of you the last while, but I'm following up on my homework. I went ahead and did the 2050 review that you talked about last time, read through it, studied it out, and felt that there was a lot of good things, a lot of research done to identify the problems that Syracuse is going to have to face. And the trouble is when we went through that and saw, you can see those are real, those are things that have to be adapted. But when we got down to the solution, the definition by low density, various densities, it looked to me like it kind of countered part of the original general plan, where any zoning change needs to, carefully look at the existing conditions, the people who are there, things like that. It looks like this kind of brushes by that. And I've talked to some people about trying to annex, but when they see that, they say, well, we can't be assured of what's going to happen to us, so they're not willing to. An example is like, you see here it says low density residential, A1, R1, R2, cluster and RPC. Those are vastly different, and they're incompatible uses, some of them right next to each other. And so, and for example, the challenge we had at the shoreline, that was going to become one of the most dense pieces of property in the city, and yet it was looked at as low density residential. And I know I've been asked to support someone in, changing, I guess appeal of that, and I kind of trying to see, is that the only way to go about it, or get this resolved, or because it does. I've had some discussion with people about the annexing, and they say, hey, we can't tell where we're going. So there's a problem with that part. I applaud the research that was done, but I'm saying the solution leaves a lot of us kind of hanging out. Well, it's not clear what we're going to do. I'll just make that comment. If there's, I guess I'm not here to question it, but maybe you could point me who I should be talking to. So.
Thank you. We're not open to discussion. I'm sorry, Keith, during this portion. I'm so sorry. Is there anyone else who would like to address the council on any issue?
So it's probably a good spot for him to make that comment.
Yeah.
To the council.
Yeah. Yes.
My name is Donna King, and we're new to Syracuse, and thank you very much for inviting me and my friend Kathy, who's on her way. I don't know if this is the proper time to address the xeriscaping issue that I had, or do I wait until that comes up under the agenda?
I would ask you to make your comments now, and then
Okay.
the council will discuss it.
Okay. So I used to be a landscape designer, and I'm very much supportive of reducing water usage, especially unnecessary water. So a few of us in Stillwater decided to do xeriscaping, which also included zero irrigation. We have our irrigation pipes cut down to the ground. We are not using anything. We have had everything approved by the HOA. We've got, for instance, in our property, just different colored, really nice gravel, and then we have perennials in pots all around the yard, probably about 20 different perennials that are all native and all low water and low maintenance. And so our question is, we understand that there's no meter on secondary water, but why are we paying for water when other people are using so much? For example, people who are putting in sod are watering 4 or 5 times a day and using a great deal of water. So we think that there should be some kind of a remedy or an exemption for those of us who are choosing to do the correct thing environmentally.
Thank you. We'll be discussing it this evening. Thank you. Anyone else? Yes.
My name is Juan Solórzano. I live in Syracuse City for more than 20 years, and this is our second home in Syracuse. We did not know we were not supposed to build a carport. We hired a contractor that told us we didn't need a building permit because it was not attached to the house. Maybe the contractors need to be educated about building code in Syracuse City. Also, in front of our house is a small courtyard that extends more than 3 feet from the house, and then the side of the garage extends out the same more than 3 feet. When did the building code regulation change? Because we have had the courtyard for 19 years, and the city code officer said we have to take the courtyard down because it was in violation of city code. After 19 years, I'm not very sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you wanna get his contact information?
Sure.
Well,
This is all, this part of the issue with his is relative to what we already discussed with the heights of them. But he's got an additional issue with a courtyard in front, so.
Noah, would you get with him, and we'll try to resolve that? Anyone else? Hearing and seeing none, I'll close public comment. Again, there'll be an opportunity at the end of our meeting. Cassie, you indicated that UTA wanted to visit this.
Yeah, we were just contacted by the Utah Transit Authority, through Angie Olson, the admin there. She just requested time on the agenda for trustee Beth Holbrook to come and present some information about the services provided by UTA in Syracuse City, so just went over her, she has a PowerPoint presentation.
Great,
Sad
thank
to
you.
recognize you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening to everyone. Beth Holbrook, just for the record, Utah Transit Authority. And I wanted to stop by Syracuse and introduce myself, make sure that everyone knows who I am and what, if there's any questions ever that you have in regards to UTA, whether it is buses, whether it is, future growth, whatever, I'm here to help you in any way that I can. I did bring just a couple bits of data. Hold on, stand by. Let's see. No, I think it's kind of frozen. I can go ahead and talk a little broadly at first, and I'll flip my presentation around until we can get up, and then you can see some of the specific Syracuse data. We'll go with that at the end. One of the things that UTA has been doing in the last 10 months is we have been doing an analysis of the bus system that we have here in Davis and Weber counties both. And I apologize, just for context, it's usually my first presentation or my first slide. So the new governance model, thank you, established 3 trustees. I am the trustee that is over Davis, Weber, and Box Elder counties. And we have been in place since November 1st of 2018, so almost a year. And one of the things that we have been looking to do is to make sure that our services are known and that there is a direct dialogue for anyone who has questions or comments or issues. So just a little bit briefly, this is just service that is in Syracuse specifically. This is one of our routes, 626, that has, you can see the ridership there, and you can see basically the structure of that service. And you can also see some of the implementations that we are slowly doing with the number of bus stops that we have in this area. As you know, everyone is experiencing growth in relative to their communities, and we want to try to be as thoughtful as possible to address some of those growth issues. And so we'd like to make sure that everyone is aware that we have planners that can talk to city staff or anyone else to talk about growth and kind of what a structure would look like in an ideal model in terms of maybe land use or density of any kind that you guys are focused on. This is just a map in regards to how that service goes through your city right now at this time. And the service choices, so I'm gonna go ahead, I got ahead of myself. So the basically the engagement process is such that we want to make sure that we are spending the maximum dollars that we can to incorporate everyone to have access onto the system in some facet. You can see that we've done a huge outreach and tried to really figure out what we can do to streamline and make our system more effective so that we're moving people around as best as possible. As you know, with Davis County and Weaver County both, they do have a couple of nexus points. Some people are this is unique because in Syracuse, people are going to Hill Air Force Base or Ogden or further south down to Salt Lake area, generally speaking, and obviously there's some differences to that, but that is structurally how that's looking. And so what we want to do is we want to maximize access, and typically the best way to do that is to analyze what we currently have and then make sure that we are looking at the growth strategies of the communities as we go through them. And our final goal is to implement this in fall of 2021 so that we can have far better service and more directed to where the density is than what we had in the past. Some of the key choices that we had is we have to kind of take a look at what we can do within our budget, recognizing that we are funded by sales tax and federal dollars. And so we take a look at the various things, like you can see there, for instance, you can see that we do construction, we do congestion, air quality, and various other modes. And in addition to that, we also obviously want to make sure that we're servicing people who need access because they don't have a vehicle for whatever reason, whether it is a disability or whether it is just economic opportunity. The discussion point is basically ridership or coverage, which means where do we want to focus? Do we focus on maximizing ridership, in other words, getting as many people off of these higher density areas as possible to replace the number of vehicles? Or do we look at coverage, which means there could be somebody that is further west of Syracuse, for instance, in a cul-de-sac. How does that look? Should that person who also pays taxes be able to have access to our system? And what would that look like? And the balance, if you will, in Davis County and in Weaver County as well is it's actually 60% coverage today and 40% ridership, which means part of it is geography, right? We have a long, skinny area that we have to traverse. So there is that part of it as well. But we also want to focus on strategic ridership, and that's been the dialogue that we've been having thus far. As you can see, the ridership goal is major corridors with the buses that we have. Coverage goes throughout the community. Where do we look at what we can use? And strategically speaking, to maximize dollars, it's more of a ridership model that has been suggested by so Mayor Eric Craythorne of West Point is the local advisory council member for UTA, and he actually represents Davis County, and their discussion points that they had as a county basically created what to do future modeling wise. So when we get more revenue, the goal would be to take a look and see how we can do our existing service that we already do, which is the coverage 60%, ridership 40%, and flip that a little bit moving forward, knowing that we're building in more and more communities are seeing growth of varying kinds. And so with that in mind, it is a decision of service and land use. Obviously, the denser, the closer people are to stops, the ability to move them efficiently is highest. And within that phrase, there's also that first and last mile, so the walkability / access points discussion as well. Some of the discussion points that I won't go into in detail, but you can see here is how do you manage your land use? I know you had a question on land use, and I know that it's a strategic discussion for communities today because growth is such a relevant issue for your communities. You can see how in an ideal world, if you will, transit maximizes when it's more of a direct street than going through cul-de-sacs and you know, around schools and so things like that. The goal is to ask, what do we want to achieve? Now, as an organization that has federal funding tied to our infrastructure that we have, we are required to address Title VI issues, which are making sure that people without a lot of opportunities to do so have access to a transportation method, which is all bus here, but of course adjacent cities a front runner as well. This is the network frequency, and I'm sorry, I know this is really tiny. It's really a challenge to do this on a PowerPoint, but of course this is with you guys, so if you ever wanted to go into details, I can explain it to you. This is basically showing our frequency and our structure as it exists today. So again, I talked about the fact that we have ridership or coverage and where we want that to look. Right now, we have 40% ridership, 60% coverage. The other two counties, major counties, actually flip that. They have 60% ridership and 40% coverage. And that's due to density increases that they have experienced, more so than Davis and Weaver and Box Elder. That is just an email, so if anyone has any questions, and of course I've also handed out my cards, so you guys are welcome to come and ask me any questions that you have, phone me, contact me. I really want to make sure that there is dialogue with the communities that I cover, and I also want, you know, to invite any planners, city managers, elected officials, the whole thing, to make sure that I know what it is that you guys are looking at in the future. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to have that discussion. Again, just to recap really quick, the model that Mayor Craythorne suggested for Davis County is to flip that and do 60% ridership, 40% coverage, so a flip from what we have currently. And that is at the discussion point that we are looking at, with the full implementation to be fall of 2021.
Thank you.
Yes, my question would be, well, just with the building of West Davis Corridor, just making sure that you guys are aware that the main area that we'll be looking at, and this map is.
I know, it is a little, I know.
It's okay, it's all right. Anyway, that our main intersection will be at Antelope and with approximately Bluff Road. And there's going to be a park and ride, most likely built there, and or at least that's what we've been told. And I would anticipate that we would try to get bus service to that area as well, because really our other bus stops have nowhere to park, and I have to drive 3 miles to the closest bus. So, just saying.
Yes.
So anyway, I would ask that you put that on your radar for planning.
Absolutely. We will be taking a look at that, because we have been in contact with UDOT in terms of how they want to structure that development for that corridor. And we know that access points to transit would be very advantageous, so I will make sure I make a note of that. Thank you.
Well, as far as the flipping of the model, where you're going from, you're moving the focus away from coverage to more of a ridership issue, I don't think Davis County's ready for that yet, especially not out here in the west area, where we are trying to act responsibly between density and also being able to get people off the roads. One of our major complaints we have when we have new developments come in is there's a lack of transportation. As you can see, I think in Syracuse, other than this one route, a majority of our city has no coverage for UTA. I guess I'd be curious to see what we can do to try and, you know, move down to the new park and ride, and also possibly get some additional stops in other locations in the city along some of these routes.
And even along some roads.
Along 2000, we have 3500 is becoming our larger thoroughfare. 2500, just all these different spots along Antelope. I think we could use some service in those areas, and I'm worried that if we try and flip that to get more of the focus on ridership, then we're going to start decreasing our ability to service some of these outlying areas.
Yeah, I'm not going to drive 3 miles and then get on the bus. So.
Yeah, I'm going to stay in my car and keep driving.
So you are correct. I think human nature is you know, I'm going to take the quickest access point.
Yeah.
That being said, I appreciate what you're saying, and I'm going to kind of use an example for you and tell you kind of what we are looking at long-term strategically, especially for communities very far west. And this is West Haven. Actually, was a very small community. Probably 10 years ago, I think they had roughly 4,000 or 5,000, maybe, total people in the city, and they are now in a situation where they have experienced such big growth, largely density, but not all of it, that we have now added service to their area where they had none in the past. you obviously have existing service, but we do wanna make sure that we are addressing that, because part of the growth strategies we're looking at is when we can talk to the planners and we can understand where you're looking at with your master plans in terms of either we think density should be on, you know, Antelope, or we think it should be on 2000, whatever those decisions are, we wanna understand that, because that helps us to maximize the value of transit. And it is a lifestyle change for a lot of people, and it is partly, we know that having accessibility is a key component to that. If you can access it, then you can use it, and you will use it. But until you can get to that point, as you, totally correct, pointed out, you're not gonna drive to get onto the bus, especially if you don't know where you're parking, and it is a challenge. But we are making sure that we are addressing the growth, and so we anticipate that in the next 5 years, we will come back in after we do our huge lift in 2021 and take another look and see where the continued growth has been, because even all forecasts aside, we know that the population growth as a whole on the Wasatch Front is going to almost double in the next 30 years. And so we do anticipate doing that, and we have done that, and that's what we're gonna continue to do. Your point about the flipping is well taken, and I apologize, I did not clarify this very well. The existing service is going to remain at a 60% coverage, 40% ridership. That's what the existing dollars are, and any future dollars are going to flip that model. So I apologize, that was a key thing that I did not mean to leave out, and that's where the discussion went in terms of if we focus on ridership, then we can look at strategic corridors that are either built or being widened or, expanded in some capacity, that we can maximize that.
Doug, do you have any comment?
My issue was gonna be the West Davis corridor. Corinne covered that, so.
Lisa, do you have any comment?
I'm sorry, I just had to unmute. No, I was just thinking, to Jordan's point, I wonder if you have anything, and not having seen what you presented, I apologize, I'm coming into this kind of blind, but before things build out to that point, do you do anything along the lines of smaller buses to hit as many areas as possible, but knowing that you're not going to hit your ridership goals for a few years? Do you do things like that?
That's a great question, and structurally speaking, when you're talking diesel buses, a 40-foot average bus is what you most likely see on the road. The biggest cost to that is actually the operator side of that. And so structurally, a slightly smaller bus is not as efficient as a larger bus. And that larger bus, we can integrate it into other areas as necessary, pull it in during peak times and move it around more strategically than doing smaller vehicles. But your point is taken, because we do look at that in our flex routes and our paratransit services that we provide, which are of course separate from our existing transportation models, but paratransit is those smaller buses that you see, and that's to help people with disabilities maneuver around. It is a catch-22 right now because of operator costs really drive that decision, and the ability to integrate an existing bus versus having a smaller bus makes us a little less nimble.
Yeah, let me go to David first and then back to Jordan. Dave, are you there? Jordan, you want to first?
I'm sorry, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, and I apologize, I'm in a little noisier area at the moment, but my only thought was, and I apologize again if Corinne may have covered some of this, because my connection was going in and out a little bit while she was talking, so if I repeat her, I'm just agreeing. But there seemed to be an obvious route that we could add to the city as I looked at the map that would cover some of the more higher density areas. For example, if we had a route that maybe ran down Gentile and up 3000, that would go past our higher density area down by Stillwater. It would go up through that higher density area south of Fremont, and maybe if it ran back out of the city on 193, that would just be that would cover a big chunk of the city that doesn't even come close to a couple of stops. Just thought that was a possible something to look at.
No, I appreciate that, and I know that we are looking at strategic growth, and I don't have an answer for you right now, but if you wouldn't mind, I'd be happy to go back to our planners and see what is on, at this point, it's tentative, but to see what is on their radar in terms of, because what I'm hearing you say is kind of your South Syracuse area, most specifically, Southwest, yeah.
Moving up to the north.
And I will say this, and I'll get an answer for you in terms of the question on that specific types of adding service. But I know that we're working with UDOT to make sure that we can have integration with transit and those key points, because that is ultimately what we think is going to be of highest value to the community. I know it kind of cuts right through, but that is part of our dialogue, but I will find out and I'll get back to you on that.
Thank you, David. Jordan, did you have something?
So I recently got back from a conference where we actually were talking about the automated transit, where it's more of the driverless buses. Do you have any idea, like a technological update on that, where that is? Because really that's going to solve some of your biggest logistical errors or issues as far as drivers.
That is a great question. So our AV, our automated vehicle, is currently in a pilot test mode, and it's going to be running for, I think, another 6 months. So it'll be roughly a year at that point. And we co-operate and own that with UDOT, and it's designed to really do the first and last mile. And so, for instance, it is completely operatorless, and it is geofenced so that it follows a specific pattern based on whatever has been programmed into it. It goes about 11 miles an hour. It is not designed to move quickly, but it is designed to move people so that they can get from maybe a small area within a certain area. Think of it as like, not maybe a cul-de-sac, but maybe like a residential street, right? It's designed to kind of do that, move around in this fixed area and get people to a transit stop and or like a business or something along those lines. It is part of the solution, and we certainly look at technology. Structurally, we are quite a ways away from actually having operatorless vehicles on the road. There's a lot of reasons, one of them being technology is moving so fast that we don't want to, we're in a second generation AV vehicle, and there's already 5 more that have come out. It's a big investment, and so we want to make sure that we're managing this effectively, and legislatively we don't have all the laws yet up to date to address issues like insurance and other components. So right now it's just piloting on very, on property that's either owned by the state, like the University of Utah, or Farmington Station. We had an agreement with them. So one of the other components that I think could bear mentioning is we also are going to be starting a microtransit pilot. And that's basically an app-based program. So think of it as like an Uber or Lyft. Let's say you are in a cul-de-sac right now, and you wanted to get to, maybe you wanted to get off of like 2200 West or something like that, go to a transit stop, or maybe go to the doctor's office. You would place your, say where you are, and it will act basically like Uber. It will show you where it's at, so it's 5 minutes away or whatever. It will not do door-to-door service. It's designed to take multiple people to a roughly same location. So think, for instance, your seniors that have to go to the doctor's office. They're not trying to hit a transit stop, but they are trying to stay within that community. And what they can do is they can request it, and it does allow for phones, just in case you were thinking we were dealing with all texts here, including phone. And it is basically designed to get them within a half a block of pickup and destination. The goal being they could have a neighbor 5 doors down that wants to do something similar at a similar amount of time. It's not a perfect solution, but we feel like this is a great way to integrate technology and hopefully keep costs lower, because the cost of that is not an Uber or Lyft, which, as you know, is based on peak times. It would just be a flat $250, which is what we charge right now for bus service for an individual. And we're hoping that, so this microtransit pilot is currently in Southwest Salt Lake County, so Harriman, Bluffdale, South Jordan, and we are going to be doing this pilot, and we're hoping to integrate that after a year. So the pilot's going to be for a year, because we really want to make sure we understand where are people going, and how can transit make them change some of their lifestyle choices. That's kind of the key thing, because if you are able to use transit if you weren't in the past, then you might change your lifestyle. So we got to figure that out.
I would love to be able to go to the grocery store without having to get in my car. That would be awesome.
Well, and that is one of the goals eventually, and it would just, like, again, it's designed to say, you know, if you can, it does have access to a vehicle. I should mention this as well. Uber and Lyft only have like maybe 2% of their entire fleet that has ADA capabilities, and these microtransit pilots have ADA compliance. Because we get federal funding, we have to adhere to that. And so if you're in a wheelchair, if you have other mobility issues, even if you just use a cane, for instance, you can still utilize this service. And I think that is going to be really, I'm hoping that with all the data that we would get from this coming year, that we'll be able to integrate that into communities like Syracuse, because right now, you guys, for the most part, move in your vehicles. Some people call it that you have this 2,000-pound, you know, thing attached to you, so to speak. And we're hoping that we can at least maybe encourage some people to use transit in a different way.
I think that would be awesome.
So
how do I sign up to be a pilot for that?
Well, I will definitely put you on the list.
This has been a great discussion. Beth, thank you for being with us in the economy of time. I'm going to move us on.
Thank you so much.
Did we cover everything you wanted to get through?
Yes, and again, please reach out to me if you have any questions. I think you want to give these to the other council members who are
Thank you.
Noah, let's discuss landscaping regulations and request to reduce water rates. Could you bring this up to date there, and then we'll begin the discussion.
We're talking about secondary water and xeriscaping.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if I need it. Okay. It's mostly just references to city ordinances, and my goal is to lead a discussion. This was something that, some research that you all asked for, so I've returned with some information, mostly existing ordinances, so that you're aware of kind of where we're at on what our requirements are already. From a planning perspective, you know, anytime you can encourage conservation is a good thing. However, we do have some ordinances and standards for irrigation systems that is a citywide system. So we require all new developments to install a secondary water system as part of the roads, inside the roads. We require each unit to be hooked into the secondary water system. Of course, we have a fee in our fee schedule based off of the size of connection, which is usually $16 for I think it's 3/4 inch. Also, is when a subdivision is developed, they're required to give us water rights, water shares. So there's a very big investment into this citywide system from the developer and also from the city as we maintain those lines. But like I said, it's good to encourage conservation, but that's up to you guys of how you want to find that balance of understanding that the majority of everybody is still on this system that we've required, and it's still part of our standards, versus those people that are not using the system. However, it's stubbed to their property and there's been a big financial investment there. So the goals of the conversation here are to decide if you want the ordinances to be amended, or if there are fees. I think maybe the low-hanging fruit here is there could be a fee waiver for a yard that's landscaped a certain way. But we have a fee schedule that's applied to everybody, so there would have to be a system of tracking who has this waiver and inspecting it and ensuring that they don't hook into it later, right? So that's the goal. Up to you guys. if you wanna pursue some sort of fee waiver, or if you want, you could decide to, you can direct me to do some more research, and I'd be happy to come back and, you know, give you some more information about it, what other communities are doing.
Dave, do you wanna lead us out in this discussion?
I'd like to cede my lead on this to somebody at the table, since I'm in a noisy area.
Okay, all right. Jordan, you wanna lead out?
Sure. So I guess I have a question for our staff. One of the fundamental issues I have is I think I would love to be able to do this, but I don't know how to prevent someone from cheating. And that's kind of the fundamental issue. If we had metering in place on all of these lots, then I think this would be a great idea. Because then we can say, you know, these guys are not using it. But as of right now, we just have to trust them. And while I would love to just to trust all of them that say, you know, we're not using the secondary water, even though many of these people that may xeriscape in the future may have the complete irrigation underneath their yards, they're just gonna say, well, I'm not gonna use it anymore. I think the only way I can see to move forward on this is these properties would have to have a water meter in place. Otherwise, I don't see how we could do this. The problem is we don't have water metering in place on a majority of these properties. That's just been a requirement we put on in the last year that these water meters start being placed in the secondary water. So I personally don't know how we can do that. Can someone remind me the cost of a water meter? Robert? Do you remember just, I know I'm putting you on the spot. I thought it was about 2,000-ish.
To retrofit, the state estimates between 1,100 and 1,800.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
However, some of the homes have been set up with the new standard to where a meter could be just dropped into it. I'm not really sure which properties, you know, we're looking at.
So I'm actually okay with doing the waiver as long as a meter is in place. But up until that point, I don't see how we could do that. And I also don't feel I know this is on our long-term plan to get meters everywhere, just because the state told us we need to. But I don't know, I'll leave it up to the rest of you guys. We can talk about this. Either, I don't know if we want to prioritize some of these locations, because it is a cost savings for the citizens, which if they're not using the water, they don't have to pay for it. At the same time, I have to be able to assure the rest of the taxpayers that it's fair to them because they're really not using it.
Well, I have kind of the same thoughts, but I was thinking of the option of capping it. Is there a way the city can cap that a resident could not uncap?
It can either be locked, right, or it can be capped. So if the stop and waste follows our new standard, there's a hole that we can just put a lock on it, and then we just have to check it every so often, make sure it wasn't tampered or cut off, right? Or yeah, we can physically disconnect it.
But now there is a cost for the staff to go out and verify those locks on an annual or semi-biannual basis.
I want to say one more factor to this. That I think it's important as a city to have a secondary water system. And I would not give that up, and I would still have these same ordinances and fees that require that in development. So if we were to do something, I wonder if we could split out the $16 and whatever cents cost to say this much is used for upkeep of the system and this much pays for water. And then waive the cost of the water, but not the pipe, because I think that's important to have in the city, and any given resident could sell their home and the next resident may want the water. And we would want the pipe there and ready and maintained. So I would entertain that option as well.
Pipe is also essential to connect one property to another. You can't like skip over. So, and then, I mean, I love the idea of moving to xeriscaping if that's what you would like to do. The only problem is that even with like low watering plants, if we go to culinary, then you're putting more stress on the culinary system, which we're trying to upgrade as well.
but culinary is more expensive, and as
Sure,
they use
and
more,
they-
they'll pay more.
That's true, but I'm just saying that I don't know if we wanna encourage people to
Use
go over
culinary
to
to water
culinary.
plants.
Right, because, I mean, we already have a problem with our, we're trying to provide for that growth already, and.
Good point. In fact, it's against our ordinances to use culinary to water landscaping because of obviously the use, but also the fear of some sort of, it'd be very difficult to do, but like if the hose was left, I don't know. Robert could probably explain that phenomenon better than I could, but, and then also another point to consider is that, everybody's required to have landscaping in their yards, and landscaping is defined as having vegetation. So even the most xeric of plant will still require some, and some of them can survive just on rainwater, but most of these plants are still gonna need water somehow. But it's up to you guys. You know, you could do a
Let me go through the council.
application, and the application could have a fee to cover staff time to go check on it, or a discount off of the $16 because they're using less water. I don't know, up to you guys.
No, we also had talked about changing out to meters to any new construction, and we had also pinpointed areas that we wanted to put additional meters on. But wasn't that just a one-time thing?
So the additional meters, the radios, I think you're talking about, is the culinary system.
Right, never mind,
I thought we were also requiring it on secondary as well.
It is, but the additional ones that we budgeted
That
for
was-
is
Oh,
radio.
yes, okay, that's the budget.
For
Got it.
retrofitting.
But we could also discuss something similar to that when we come.
Brody,
back
you
to
had a
it.
comment. Lisa, will you and Dave be ready in a minute?
Yeah, I just wanted to stress the importance of the issue of culinary water for watering landscaping and lawns. The city's culinary system is not designed to handle those kind of loads. If people were to do this on a large scale, our whole plan with the amount of water that we use and the well production that we have is not meant to sustain outdoor watering.
And that's my concern, is that if we allow this where we're going to waive the fee, the house has to be 100% xeriscaped and cannot use any culinary water in their yards for watering plants, and I just don't know how you enforce that. Unless you truly are just capping it, but then what's, I think she said perennials are around the yard. She said they were native, but do they require any water? And I know you have a comment, and I promise we'll let you, we said the mayor will probably recognize you, but I just want to make sure that that's the fundamental issue, is we cannot use culinary water to water any plants in the yards just because it will cause issues with
Could be
the
rainwater
supply.
harvesting too.
Lisa?
Yes, sorry, I unmuted early, I guess. I hope it didn't bugger up your connection. A lot of comments are similar to what I have in mind. I love the idea of prioritizing their home. If somebody wants to xeriscape, if we were to prioritize the meter implementation in those homes, that might be a great incentive and catalyst for people to conserve. I also think it's really unfortunate that really the system isn't set up for options in landscaping like this yet, but it will be. So it puts our city at such a disadvantage at this point because the cost has already been part of the development and it's expected to be maintained because we have maintenance costs involved. So I think that there is definitely a future remedy with this, especially with metering. I like the idea of incentivizing water conservation with installing their meters first. And but at this time, I don't know how we would monitor, how we would, just as Jordan said, keep dishonesty, and I'm not in any way suggesting that these families are dishonest, just future people who are saying, I'm xeriscaping, but then in fact aren't. And we do have the maintenance involved, so those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. David?
I think it's been covered, so I'm gonna go ahead and reserve comment.
Okay, council, you may not be aware of it, but these two ladies are not really applicants, but they asked for this to be on the agenda. I'm going to I'm going to hear them if you'd like to stand now and address the council.
Well, I do have one suggestion to remedy that concern regarding using culinary water is to require someone who does not want to use secondary water to have a rain barrel. So that rain barrel then collects the water. It's covered. I had one when I was in Colorado. And that rain barrel, I lived in Grand Junction, which is high desert, which had much less water than this area. And we had plenty of water to even share. So that's one thing that you could do. A second is when you're talking about xeriscaping and you're talking about native, you are talking about those plants which are sustainable completely on their own, maybe not the first year, but definitely after that. They require no water. They will still flower, you can have cactus, you can have succulents, there are all kinds of things. And I would encourage that if you were to go forward, with considering this, that part of the requirements are that there are certain plants that must be then planted in that xeriscaping plan. For example, with the HOA, we had to provide the names and pictures of those plants that we were going to container, so that they could, of course, make sure that what in fact we were planting is something that is not just sustainable, but something that's also attractive to look at, and not dangerous either, and certainly not noxious. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Did you have something?
Yeah, I just was thinking, you said don't use
Would
culinary
you give
water
us your
outside
name-
at all.
your name
I'm
too,
Kathy
sir?
Henson. I live next door to Donna. And as far as xeriscaping, we have plants in pots. And as far as somebody buying our home in the future, which is a possibility, Dennis and I are older, they're to have to dig up all kinds of rock to get to putting in the system. So I don't know if they'd ever do that kind of thing. But the other thing is to use culinary water. If you had a plant on your porch or outside, you're going to use culinary water for it. And I understand if there's a lot of plants or big areas, you don't want to use culinary water, but just for a few pots, I don't understand the whole thing with the culinary water. I came from Minnesota, we had all kinds of water. So anyway, that was my thought.
Yes.
And Kathy does have in her hand, if anybody would like to look at examples of her yard and our yard.
Could we keep this, download what's on it, and
Yeah.
give it back to you? Would that work? Cassie?
There are 4 pictures on there, and they're labeled with the address.
Well, the purpose of this meeting was to have this discussion, and thank you. We really
Thank you for
appreciate
the
you
time.
bringing it to our
Appreciate
attention.
it.
This is a work session, no decision can be made tonight, but we thank you for your input.
Thank you for letting us.
Council, thank you for visiting us. Let's move on to discussion regarding District 3 water shares. Brody, can you lead out on this one?
I'll start, and then Paul can fill in the blanks here. So, this issue comes to our attention because of the situation with the various water companies and the water shares available versus the amount of land that is available and being sold for development. When private property owners want to develop, they do have to bring water shares, or the developer has to bring water shares to the city, so that land can be irrigated once the homes or businesses are built. We're in a situation where the amount of shares in terms of actual certificates are not readily available, and however, there is an avenue to get water to Syracuse City through a direct contract with Weaver Basin. Currently, our ordinance requires water shares in terms of the actual certificates, and so what landowners and developers are faced with is trying to find those shares. The option of just saying, nope, you have to bring a share, we can't contract with Weaver Basin, becomes problematic, especially in terms of possible consequences legislatively in the state, with basically stopping development artificially. And and so what we discussed with you before, and what Paul and some others we put together, is some draft language that can kind of address that of how a development can come in, and instead of providing actual shares, they would provide a calculated fee that would allow the city to contract for the contracted water with Weber Basin. Now, the complicating factor here for the city is most of the original shares provided to the city were done with what's called original project water. Most of the secondary water development from Weber Basin and through the Weber Basin watershed early on was done with heavily subsidized funds through federal money to develop that water. Over the succeeding decades, the amount of federal funding for those projects has waned, and it is now more of the policy from the federal government that the users of that water pay for a greater share of that water, and so that's us. Everybody in the Weber River watershed, we have to pay more of our fair share than what we have in the past, and so as successive water development has occurred, the cost for that has been higher. And Weber Basin refers to them as districts, and these are just phases of water development, right? There's the original phase, which we call project water. Then there was a project 2 water. Now they're selling project 3 water, and in a matter of, I think, a year or 2, maybe 3, they will be selling project 4 water. And so, and each of these costs more and more. To give you an example, project 3 water on our annual assessment for that water is 7 times more expensive than original project water. So we have an issue with, new development coming in. They may, if we allow for this to happen, there's going to be some issues, policy issues that we have to discuss on who pays for the water. It all comes through the same pipe, right? We're all one city, so one argument is, we all share in a community water system. So the cost of it would be blended across all users. Another argument is, well, the new people coming in are getting the more expensive water, so they should pay a different rate. And so Paul's put together some language here that can kind of address those issues.
Yeah, so when we discussed this at our last work session, that's a concern. You've got the established residents, and there are quite a few, about 30,000 of you, and you have the Project 1 water, and the fees that you pay are based off of both the infrastructure and the annual assessments for that water. And so trying to walk that line of fairness and equity, what we're looking at is a developer could bring in a project, and they could, rather than bringing shares, which they would need to purchase usually, they would be able to pay a fee in lieu of that water assessment they would have paid. And then it covers also both any lump sum that's required for the city to pay to contract for that more expensive water. And also we would project the additional assessments that we paid over the course of 10 years. At the end of that 10 years, we would have essentially a separate billing rate for people on that more expensive water. And some of the things we put in the ordinance were, for instance, something on the plat that says, hey, just you have more expensive water, so in 10 years you're going to be paying more. And then we've talked to Steve about having a notice on the bill that says, you have this many months left, or this many cycles left until you have to pay this additional fee for water. So people are kind of aware it's coming. In that way, then you'd be able to protect existing users from having their fees go up to absorb the more expensive water that's needed for new development. And then other people would have a little bit of a buffer where they wouldn't have to pay additional fees for a few years. The 10-year number that was sort of the number of how much it would cost approximately for the city to get this water, compared to what shares we're selling for when it was able to purchase shares. If you want to go this route, the next step would be to talk to Weber Basin and make sure that we have contracts like this in place, or get them in place, so that we can start offering this as an option to developers. But we do have, an ordinance that's drafted. We did get outside counsel to look at this, water law counsel, who we use for all our water stuff, and he's given it the green light as well. But if you have any questions or comments, that's our goal today, is to find out whether you want to continue discussing this.
So District 3 water, contract water, you're saying only the city can get that? A developer cannot get that through Weber Basin?
We have to accept it essentially, but I think we would want it.
Yeah, it's wholesale, and so it's going to be given, I don't think they can contract separately with it, because you need to be able to get it into your system. Since we have the system and we can accept the water wholesale, then that's, but they essentially we're passing on the cost of that for at least the first 10 years to the people who do the development.
And so why the 10 years instead of just saying to every new resident after such and such a date pays more?
We're looking for a rough equivalency. So if we're exacting a certain amount of water for for shares and things, we want it to be roughly equivalent if we're going to be having someone pay a fee instead of it.
Otherwise, no one will give you water shares again.
Right.
Yeah, right now the cost of a share of water is the equivalent of 10 years assessments.
Okay. So it's not as if the developer's got to pay more up front and then pass that on to the resident.
It's roughly the same for the developer.
And I use the term rough equivalence because that's actually, the Utah Supreme Court uses that to say that's a lawful exaction. You can't exceed that. Like, you can't just extort money or other things from people. It needs to have a rough equivalence to its impact on the system.
So my concern then, you kind of came up with some ideas already, but would be 10 years down the road, the anger that would be in those residents.
My water bill just went up.
Yeah.
700%, for example.
Corinne?
My question would be, is that if an older home sells and the new person moving in, do they get the benefit of using the older water, or the older price of the water, or because they weren't part of the community beforehand, do they now pay for differences of water? Is it always attached to the address? Okay, because
Yeah, be attached to the lot.
so pretty much an older home is going to become more valuable than a newer home.
I think people would probably take the price of utilities, if they're aware of it, they probably take that into consideration when they look at
right. I mean, because most of my neighborhood's now built out, but we've had many in our neighborhood who had a smaller home and built another home in the same neighborhood. And so that person would end up paying more money for the water than if they'd stayed in their smaller home. It's very interesting. The realtors need to be upfront about this if this is the case.
I'm sure they're all very upfront
Oh
about it.
yeah, sure.
So is there another option?
If you know another source of water, we'd love to hear it.
Robert just raised his hand
So,
there.
I mean, if you want, you can do a feasibility study and just determine whether that's your best option. Or you can study reclaimed water or other sources or avenues, groundwater, wells.
Reusing the car wash water, getting an aquifer built there or something.
There has been talk in the past about reclaimed water. It's just a kind of high cost. It has been a high cost in the past, so we've kind of just not, in order to keep checking our water rates low, we just haven't done the reclaimed. But I mean, the option's still out there if you wanted to study it, and maybe the end result's still the same. I don't know.
Can we put as part of this, I actually think this is probably the best solution for going forward, simply because I don't think current citizens should have to pay to bring in new people that they may or may not want anyway. But based on Facebook. But along with that, I would like to put some verbiage in here that the only way we accept this in lieu of is if there is documented efforts to try and get water shares first. I don't know if we can put that stipulation in there, because that will always be better for the citizens to try and get those water shares that belong to us, that are not going up in cost so fast. Can we put verbiage in there to at least require that this is the preferred method and they need to put at least a best effort into it in order to qualify for this secondary plan?
I think it also needs to be stated for the public that there is ample water, like we showed in the packet. It's just a matter of how much it's going to cost you to get it.
Yeah.
It's not like we're running out, and that's why it costs more. It
Right.
just.
And I like Jordan's idea, but it just seems to me that you wouldn't want to take a combination of the two in a development, would you? Because then you could.
Yeah, and the formula gets messy.
Very.
So it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, Noah, they come in with each phase, right?
Yeah, final
So,
phase.
so you could probably regulate it per phase, even though you're in the same subdivision and one group of neighbors has one rate and the other doesn't.
Because I really don't want to do this, but at the same time, I understand the legality of requiring someone to do something impossible. You just can't mandate that. But we can require them to put in a best effort that shows they went out, looked for them. I don't know what that would look like, email history, efforts at trying to acquire
Letters or something?
letters, and then at that point, they can begin the application process for this alternate method.
Dave, do you have a comment?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. My concern is that any land that's purchased within the city supposedly had water to begin with. Now, if that wasn't purchased with the land, where did it go? And I understand that sometimes it can be separated from the land, so it's not a give me that you're going to get the water with the land. But my point is, I really hesitate to let this in the city if there's a way that we can help with it, because it really ought to be the requirement to provide the water that was already in place for the land involved. It is going to be an expense. It's also going to be an expense on city staff to keep track of different rates and different people's water rights. And so I'm really hesitant to allow this in if there's any reason that we can avoid it. I just don't think that it's going to break even. It's going to add expenses to the city in one way or another. Those are my feelings.
Lisa?
Well, first of all, I definitely agree that it's inappropriate, like an impact fee. We don't charge our previous citizens, and we wouldn't want to do that to them with incoming water increases in fees. So I think it does need to be borne by the new residents. I think it does worry all of us. I think that we will end up holding on to a huge increase when it should be up to the developer to provide for that. So I would support proof that they have tried to get the water first, because I think if we don't do that, we're going to end up with an in lieu fee every single time because of the price of it. And once again, like Corinne said, we do have plenty of water. It's just unfortunate that we're having this pass-through fee with the cost of it. So I think, again, I'll reiterate, I would support proof that the developers tried to provide the water without the in lieu fee first. I don't think it should be passed on to previous citizens. It should be borne by the new developments and the new citizens, and I wish we weren't in this position.
Jordan?
So I guess one of my concerns that Dave touched on is it is feasible that the in lieu fee could be cheaper than them going out, separating the water rights, selling those, and then just giving a portion to the city. So if the land has water rights already, we would require it to be turned over to the city, and it cannot be separated and sold off separately. Because that's my concern is it may be a point, there may be a point at which they could make more money by selling those water rights and then just paying the fee.
True. With certain water, I mean, the water shares that we're looking at, especially Layton Canal and stuff, they have a limited proximity where they can actually be useful though. So I don't know, if you try to sell Layton stock to someone up in Logan, they're not going to be able to use it. you know, so it's worthless to those people. So it seems like there's kind of a geographical limitation.
There
to that.
is.
It's gonna be used in the service area, just right now it's being used mostly for farming.
While I completely understand that, I think that the point that Jordan brings up is District 1 water is going to become more preferable and is going to continue to go up in price because somebody can hold on to it as a preferable water source. So, so that original water could just start escalating to keep up with the added expense of District 3 water, and all we're doing is making a new economy based on water. And I think that we really need to look carefully before we act. And again, I realize that we have to come up with some solution, but before we act, we have to look carefully about the legality of us forcing them to gain those original shares, because like Paul just pointed out, it's not like I could buy shares in Logan and transfer them down here. It has to come from where it can be delivered. And if that's the case, then the water is here somewhere with the original land. We have to force them to come up with that and not just take the cheap way out and say, well, I'll pay the fee, pass it on to everybody else down the road, because who's getting it passed on to is our residents. The developer isn't eating that fee down the road, our residents do.
Yep.
Can I add to that? Yeah. So, yeah, some of the market forces that would come into play in that new economy that you're talking about. You know, we've done a cursory assessment in the Layton Canal Company of, you know, which lands that are still out there on the west side of the city that will likely someday be developed, have water, and which ones do not. And a lot of them do have water, and you can assume that they would come in with that water, and the city does want the original project water. And so yeah, you don't want to create a situation to where that is more expensive than the contract water, and so there's an incentive to sell it and buy the contract water. Now, what happens though is the more supply of water that we accept through the contracting method, that dilutes the value of a share, right? Because if I'm a shareholder and I'm holding on for a high price, and then the developer says, I can just go buy it from Weber Basin directly through the city. Oh, now I got to drop my share price so that you actually buy it from me, and I'm not just holding water and I can't, and I don't have land to use it. And so there is a market force where if it may balance a little bit on the pricing if developers use this method to contract through the city directly to Weber Basin. It increases the supply, which would reduce the price of the shares overall.
I'm just concerned about that 700% increase that they're going to see 10 years from now.
But it's an interesting
And
thought,
that's-
because right now they're kind of being held hostage, those shares are.
Yeah, they're driving up the price by
Right.
holding on to them.
Can I then see if I can move us forward with some direction for Paul? The shared solution, to use a coined phrase from the past, doesn't seem to be something that you have an appetite for, is sharing those costs citywide, right? I'm not hearing
That's
any voice.
correct.
So,
Not this time.
So give Paul some direction on what you can agree on.
I think it's just, we need to put the verbiage in there that if the land has shares, those need to be turned over, and they need to make a best effort to get more shares, and if they cannot do either of those two, then we will accept the in lieu.
Show some sort of proof of interaction in trying to do so as well. Like landowners being contacted on X dates and being offered, or whatever they've.
I think David.
Dave, did I hear you?
Not yet, but I would just like to throw in there that if we could consider another option, and that is look at this a little deeper. I don't know if it's desperate that we take action in our next business meeting. I would like to look deeper into the possibility of still keeping that out of the city, if there's other ways to do that. I'm just worried that once that floodgate is open, and I hear Brody's argument, and it makes sense that we would somehow right the market value of water, but I worry that we could, I mean, the water district is not just our city. So shares could be sold from outside the city to another city. And I don't want another city to be able to say, great, we'll just buy up the Syracuse shares because now they take District 3 water, and we'll refuse to, and we'll never put our citizens in a burden that our citizens will end up in.
Dave, are you in support of a feasibility study? Like Robert mentioned.
I'm not quite sure what that entails. I mean, what's the kind of money that requires? What do we learn that we don't know today? I heard the option, but I'm not quite sure I understood the full dynamic of it.
Well, looking at other sources of water other than District 3 water.
What would that?
I guess in general, I do support that.
I don't know the cost of feasibility study, I couldn't tell you right now, but where it's needed for growth, it should be eligible paid by impact fee money for secondary water.
That would be good. I mean,
that would be preferable.
Good.
I would prefer that. I would like to see, now, something like this, I believe we're probably gonna have to have as we prepare for more growth, but I would like to make sure it's the best option.
Yeah, and I think this needs to be the last resort.
Noah?
Can I just quickly say something? So in working, part of my job is community development director. I work with a lot of the developers, and I hear, you know, I'm the one responsible for implementing this program and collecting the water shares and accounting for it and all that. And so one thing that wasn't mentioned is, and you probably, in what Doug said, you're putting the points together, there's a water shortage. As we grow, those shares are becoming more and more scarce and more expensive. And so I commend Paul and Brody for trying to get ahead of the curve so that we don't all of a sudden have this emergency situation where no more growth, nobody can build anything because we're out of secondary water. Water tanks or water or rain barrels for everybody. But one thing you guys keep asking about what are there any other choices? I think that this in lieu of fee gives us kind of a long-term, because Weaver Basin has the system in place, but this might be maybe a low-hanging fruit that could be explored. And I'm not telling you, obviously, that you have to do it, but it's something to consider. Is that right now we require 3 acre-feet per gross acre, just flat. You just draw a line around the whole subdivision, and that's what you get.
right.
Other cities, they make the developer do a little bit better math, and they take out specifically the things that are not getting watered, such as streets and driveways and roofs, whatever. So one thing we could look at is maybe, like I said, I think Paul's idea is probably the best idea, but something in the meantime, or even as part of this overall solution, is we can look at requiring the developer to do better math and calculating what's really being watered and really comparing, and like what Robert was saying, is that the number 3 acre-feet per acre, that's what that study would do, is determine, are we on par with 3? We know that corn takes more water than people's yards. So historically, the water for irrigation is actually more than what is needed, barring the crazy grandma that waters 4 times a day. But anyway, there could be some other ways that we could maybe if water shares are becoming scarce, we could require fewer shares that might stretch the available District 1 water, or whatever project water we're calling it.
And we could actually incentivize some of this.
I would say that's okay, but I know that
xeriscaping.
from previous accounting that we're minus some shares already for what we need. Because
by the calculation of the city is square. Is that kind of roads?
No, we're talking about being delivered shares that were not worth
Remember
water.
the water on it.
Yes, I remember the water.
What do you
I
think?
think Corinne brings up the best point, and that is we're already behind anything that starts reevaluating how much we need. Where that opens another can of worms. Are we going to have people start saying, I turned over 3 and now you don't require 3, I want a refund? I mean, that would be absurd and impossible.
Sounds like there's some more work to do.
Brody, do you think that staff could put their
Yeah,
That's close together.
I think based on the, you know, the consensus, majority consensus I'm seeing, I think we can at least go back and try a few different things. I don't know that there's enough support right now to do a study. We don't have it in the budget anyway right now, but we could look at what that study, the scope of work would be, and come back and see if that's something you'd like
And
to
if we
look
can
at.
have it possibly a shorter timeline, because I do recognize the fact that if we go very long, its price is gonna keep going up.
And it might just come down to we have to start pushing water metering on secondary, as much as I hate to say that.
Well, and that also has a cost too.
It does, it has a big cost.
Millions.
Brody and Paul, I think you have some marching orders and we can go on. Let's move to item F. Economy of time. A request from Stillwater Lakes Estates Homeowners Association regarding the surplusing of road. Paul, do you want to lead us through this one?
Yeah, I'll introduce you, and it looks like we've got some Stillwater HOA representatives here that can probably also answer questions, or they're available to let you know what they'd like. We've got a development agreement with Stillwater Estates. One of the provisions states that the owners have the option to convert a private street designation in the future with approval from the city. There's a map in your staff report showing the roads that they would like to make private. So the way that, as we were looking at different ways to accommodate that transfer, the best way seems to us to surplus it. In the surplus policy that we recently looked at, there was a provision that said that if we gave road to the HOA that surrounds the road, then it's essentially a transfer for value. The value that the city gains from that is we no longer have the maintenance or replacement responsibilities for it. We had the city engineer give us an estimate of replacing about the 0.6 miles of Stillwater Drive and Lakeview Way. And currently, if we were to go and replace 0.6 miles, it would cost us, depending on what we did in the road, about $500,000. So the HOA has indicated they're willing to take on that responsibility. Part of the surplus would be an agreement and an acceptance from them saying that they're not going to try and foist this on the city at some point down the line, you know, to gain the benefit of the private road and then try and say, well, city, we want to give it back to you now that it's broken. This would be like they would be taking it, and we discussed this with Mr. Thane, who's here, and he's aware of the costs. He's talked about the costs, and they've indicated they're willing to take that on. Considering the contract and the fact that we would lose that maintenance responsibility, staff doesn't have a particular objection to it. We'd still have access to the utilities, so would, you know, power, gas. Public safety can still have access to those. There are devices you can place on gates that will open for emergency vehicles. They wouldn't need a code or a card or anything. They just could go in if there was an emergency. So yeah, we've got again, we've got HOA representatives here. If you have any questions for them, or if you have anything you'd like to know from us further, happy to talk to you about it.
Council, would you like to hear from the applicant and the HOA?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm good with this stuff. Go for it.
You're gonna get rid of a bunch of costs, why would
That's
you
right.
be okay with that?
I do understand how the easements work, because, you know, we do have utilities under there, so,
They actually
yeah, so that they're also gonna allow us to get in, service everything.
If there's sewer backs up, they will come.
That's what I figured, but, so as long as all the easements are in place and access for emergency vehicles is set up, then.
But we have certain policies that govern if somebody digs into our road, how they replace it. What governs if we dig into their road?
It's a good question. Yeah, I don't know if they've adopted
Road
they
streets
have
ordinance.
standards or things, or yeah.
That'd be up to them.
Yeah, but what if they say, if you dig into our road, you replace the whole
Like if
thing?
there's a broken water line and we need to fix it, right? Because they don't want their house flooded, so I'm sure they'll want us to dig in there and dig it out. And then
Well,
make sure that it's-
but Doug brings up a good point, is we need to make sure that whatever, where this is covering our pipes and we do have easements through here, we need to make sure that the restrictions on this are reasonable. And I don't think they're gonna tell us that. But at the same time, do we need something in writing just to make sure we all understand what it is we're getting into?
I think part of the conveyance acceptance could be that we would abide by whatever the city standards are.
That's
So,
probably okay.
You know, whatever we impose on the rest of the utility companies, we just follow them
Follow
ourselves. I don't know if that'd be I don't know if you'd like to weigh in, representatives, or think that's fair, or what are you thinking?
I was just gonna suggest the same thing Paul just did, and that was that we just do it on the basis that whatever the city standard is, they accept as the replacement standard if there's an easement issue. My only real concern with this, because I'm happy as a clam to give them the burden of the road, but the only thing that I would express at this point is, a couple of weeks ago, I was out late driving down Antelope and was passed by our fire department, who are wonderful people, and I love them if you're in the room. But I have, since joining the city council, tried to observe what happens when our men in blue and red are off doing their thing. And so I pulled over to the side of the road and I watched them get held up at the Antelope Island gate. And they were held up for quite some time. And I'm sure the state has something similar to what we're describing as allowing emergency access. I'm just wondering what happens when that fails and who suffers, and is the city have any liability for allowing that if they can't get through? Because clearly that one night, and maybe it's the only time it's ever happened, I don't know, but clearly that one night it failed, and emergency vehicles were held up there for a good 15-20 minutes.
Well, I mean, as far as the gates, it wouldn't be the city's gates, so we would be attempting to get there. I don't think we'd have any liability if they failed, because it wouldn't be, it's not like we installed them.
Okay.
They're maintained by the HOA, so if they were to fail, we'd try to do our best to get around them or through them as need be. Yeah, we'd try and get there as best we could, but I don't think that there'd be a liability for the city if we couldn't get through the gates that were privately installed.
Okay, Sensei, let's go for it.
Is that the consensus?
With those clarifications.
Mark, do you accept those kinds of?
Well, what I would propose, and I appreciate the support to go forward on this, I would propose that we get together and really clarify, because I think all the easements are platted, they're in place, they have to be in order to finish the subdivision. But yeah, if we're not taking over sewer, you don't want us to, or water, you don't want us to. I don't want somebody pumping bad water back into your system, we get that. It's pretty much the surface, the asphalt, the structure of the road that Robert talked about, curb and gutter, sidewalk, and all that. And so as long as, I mean, if the city said, yeah, we have to come in and fix a sewer problem, and they dug up the road, I guess my expectation as the HOE, that you would put that back to the city
Right.
standard.
That's what we're saying.
That's what you're saying, okay.
We're saying you can't tell us to put in cobblestone instead.
Right, so we're good. I think if that's the case, we'd be fine. As far as the gate activation, I don't know what Antelope Island has on their gate. Do they have siren activation? I don't know, but if it didn't open with a fire truck, they don't have the same thing we're gonna be required to put in, which is.
I'm getting some head shakes from some officers back here, so it sounds like maybe they don't have it.
Yeah, they
So,
don't.
so we would have to have that, obviously, if you pull up with the sirens blaring, that gate's gonna open unless there's something else going on, right? But it would be different than the Antelope Island scenario, I think.
So the next step, if the council wants to go this route, with any surplusing of this type, I think we should have a public hearing. In the meantime, we can draw up the conveyances and the acceptances to make sure that all the parties understand what's gonna happen, and that'd be part of the packet.
One quick question. Could we put on the radio meters for the culinary so as they drive around the residence rather than through it? So that's not a problem for a meter reading. Require the meters.
We have radios on.
They already do? Oh, well then we're good.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
One thing you need to know, while there's a reduction in cost, there's also a reduction in revenue with our BNC road funds from the gas tax.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not all one-sided, there will be a reduction in our revenue a little bit.
But isn't that rated per mile? Because this is only a little over a mile.
Right.
And seriously, from what we saw at ULCT, this is really beneficial for us in the long run.
Yeah, just so everybody's aware of that, that's all I'm saying.
Are we in agreement?
Yes.
With those clarifications and?
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Item 9, Brody, you want to begin this one? Council, you'll remember some time ago we discussed one of our officers leaving and was activated and had to do a tour of duty away. He has come back, and you asked us to bring this back when he came back. So,
Right, so we had this question internally, and so we went back and listened to the tape of the meeting, the audio. And there were several scenarios of what could happen if this officer came back and we were, through attrition or some other means, we were down one person. And one of the scenarios that you discussed actually did happen. We did have a retirement this year, and then we had some successive promotions, and so now we were ready to, if we were to fill this spot, so we have an open, in the police department, we have an open position right now. However, this officer has come back from active military duty. He's back in service with the city, and so we're here to discuss if we can go ahead and backfill that open spot. It is budgeted for in this year's budget, along with the additional vehicle, because we weren't sure,
Right.
we weren't sure what the situation would be. So that's the discussion here today.
And why are we discussing it if it's already in the budget?
We had to decide.
you asked us to bring it back.
Okay, just because of our previous
The
discussion.
council said
Okay.
we want to evaluate that at
Well,
that time.
fair
It
enough.
makes sense,
We were-
too.
We were thinking.
The one bonus to this is that we probably save some money by having that position open for a little bit, right? You know, and so that's a, bonus to your police budget, so we're not gonna be over budget,
No.
or under.
So as I remember it, so prior to him leaving, we had 18 police officers.
Was it 22?
Or 22?
24?
23.
20, okay, I couldn't remember the number. And then when he left, we backfilled his position. And then when he came back, we were curious whether or not we're gonna need an extra police officer. But since we had a retirement, we ended up with the same number as before he left, right now. So the question is, was our intention to add another police officer to the police department, or was it to temporarily backfill him in the hopes that we could, when he came back, we need to make sure that his position was still open, so we had to open up the extra position.
There was also the anticipation of continued growth too, and the numbers.
And I'm just saying this for the clarification. So the question is, do we want to move with him returning to one additional officer than when he left? So basically, are we adding one more officer to the police force? I'm not saying which way.
Actually, I don't think that's the situation. I think we had 24. We removed one through retirement, did not fill that position, and now we go back to 24. So we're actually just back to where we began. Isn't that correct?
I think that's what you said.
I agree.
Yeah, that's what I said.
That's correct.
Okay, do we have a police vehicle not being used though, correct?
No, we haven't bought it yet.
We haven't bought it yet.
Okay.
So that's the question
So that's
is.
in the budget?
So fundamentally the question here is, with him returning, do we want to increase our police department by one?
And I'd say where we at
And
in the
that's
budget.
not what we're doing. That
I
just
thought we
takes it.
That is exactly what's before us right now, yes.
Yeah.
Well, no, because as I'm reading through, it says that Lieutenant Jensen retired this spring. The department did not backfill his position based on Officer Whatcott's anticipated return.
True, but we hired a police officer before he retired.
While he was gone.
While the other police officer was deployed, so now that he's back, we are back to where we were before.
Right.
And so we are even Steven. The question is, do we want to have another police officer? And we budgeted for it. Do we want to go ahead and authorize them to hire?
And you asked us to bring it back and discuss it.
All right. I just want to make sure everyone understands what it is we're talking about here.
So I'll go right off the bat and say, yes, we want to rehire him and bring him back out and without a problem.
That's not, he's already back on.
He's here,
This
yeah.
is a brand new officer.
Pretty much.
Okay, so I don't know why we would hire yet another officer. We were already, if bringing him back on puts us right where we were and where we expected to be.
That's
Not
the
that I'm
question before
against
us.
having another officer, but I want to make sure that we're consciously raising that, not just doing it because we have the opportunities here.
Right.
Okay, should we look?
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood as I was reading this. I thought that we were wondering if we were going to rehire the officer, but no, I apologize. I see that we have, he is.
He is here, yeah.
Okay. now
Yeah,
I
he's here, he's
understand.
back, and he is awesome.
Without a car.
Okay,
Can we
so
let
we're talking
the
about
police
another
department-
position.
He has a
Okay.
car.
He has a car.
We
Okay.
we haven't hired a new officer to fill the one, and we haven't purchased a vehicle pending this discussion on that.
But we have the monies available.
Correct.
It's
It's
a
all in the
great-
budget to do the officer and the car.
So we've budgeted for one more police officer, essentially increasing our police force by one. That's our question. Is that,
And we
is that
already
correct?
budgeted for that,
Yes,
correct?
and there was a scenario that could have happened that we didn't have a retirement.
Right.
And so him coming back automatically,
It would have been,
and
so
we
that we weren't in a
kept his
negative
position,
overall.
and by law, we had to keep his position, but
Yes.
we were keeping it anyway for him to do his active military duty. So
Correct.
by him coming back, we would have had one additional.
Right, so we prepared for this
Yes.
eventuality, we budgeted
Yes.
for this,
And now
it's there, so to me, the question is, are we willing to essentially commit to this budget going, ongoing?
I have a different question, now that you
Can-
clarified, but
can
go ahead,
we-
Corinne.
Can we hear the department's opinion?
That's what I was gonna ask.
There we
I'm
go.
like,
Yeah.
what would we do with this other officer?
So we've kind of contemplated a couple different options. One being that the officer, if we're budgeted for a PO3, if we were to get a lateral transfer to come over, we could do some different things. You could obviously put him on one crew, and you'd have one crew that would have one more than another. Or we'd have the opportunity to kind of experiment with the traffic unit we have kind of presented to you guys over the last few years.
Right, yeah, it takes somebody a lot of time to
Yes,
take care of an
we
accident.
could basically assign this officer to both crews under some time and give the traffic unit an experiment and kind of see how that would result. He would be an additional body that we could use on both crews, where one crew wouldn't be heavy, you would basically even out his ability to work on both crews.
So remind me, of PO3 is experience or less experience?
Experience.
Experience.
One.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah, as we discussed in the previous retreats about this traffic safety unit, if you were to go forward with continuing with the current budget, I guess the argument for that would be it's less painful to get up to where you're going to be eventually,
Mhm.
rather than doing all three at once.
So if we did this now, we could kind of get it implemented, get it going, give you guys kind of an evaluation period. Then when the traffic unit were to come, then you would only be having the two that would come out of that for the sergeant and the other one. And this one is already kind of in the flow of that.
So with us kind of planning on training them, do we wanna bring in a PO3 and maybe go to a PO1 that we can train up and kind of put him over there?
The downside to going to a PO1 would be, just based on dynamic and history and what we've seen historically with hires. If we were to do that, we have a current academy class going that will graduate in December, but with a 3-month FTO process, you wouldn't actually have the PO1 on the road till April, probably.
Yeah. And our experience has been with the hiring offer that we offer with wages and benefits and everything. We typically don't attract an experienced officer from another city. We typically will end up with someone out of the academy. If we wanted an experienced officer in the traffic safety unit, yeah, we would assign an existing officer.
Right.
And then
So
hire
we're saying
them.
we're gonna budget for a PO3 and end up hiring a PO1 anyway?
That has been, I think, the majority of the time, that has been the case, where we try to get a PO3, but we can't.
We hope for those,
So you pretty much.
So we get a rookie.
You bring in a rookie, but then you also, to replace a rookie, but did you take a rookie or prior rookie and advance them?
Yeah, we would have
To
somebody in the patrol that's already experienced likely take over and be that traffic officer, but the other person would fill that vacancy on the crew, if that makes sense. So you hire a PO3, ideally would be a lateral from another agency. The dynamic we have with that is a lot of times just based on pay scale and things, they end up taking a cut to come and do that. Our experience has been, we don't get a lot of historic lateral transfers of PO3s. You get generally lower PO1 coming in
So
for those.
you'd probably advance a PO2 to a 3, is that what you're saying?
Or we'd take a current PO3, have them be the actual traffic officer on those two crews, and the new PO1 would go through the academy hire, and we'd do that and then put them back on that crew and that piece.
I gotcha.
So until that would happen, until those crews were even out.
And Dave, as I recall the conversation, I know that you had mentioned at the time that this is one of the things that you were curious if this was going to be what was going to be assumed when he got back. I'd be curious to have you weigh in on this, because I remember you were kind of concerned that this was just a play for another officer, not to say that it is. But do you remember saying that?
Yes, I do, and that's still my concern, is that the scenario we expected happened, which is somebody left about the time that we knew that somebody was coming out. We knew that wasn't a give me, that, you know, that was, could be possible that it didn't happen. But what I was proposing at the time was, so far the experience was, we lose somebody every once in a while for one reason or another anyway, and I kind of figured that this was going to work itself out. So now that it has, I feel like we're arguing about, well, shouldn't we just hire an officer anyway, because we planned it just in case. And I kind of feel like we're taking advantage of this to say, well, so give us just another officer, even though the position opened itself up as we expected it might.
A note with that, I do know that by law, for anyone who is deployed, if you say, for instance, you have people on an escalator, okay, some regular civilians, maybe military service, and they are advancing in their positions, that just because they deploy does not remove them from the escalator. They maintain their spot. So
I don't think anyone's saying that.
no, well, I'm just saying too that what position is Walcott at, and is he going to, you know, is he a PO2?
He's a PO3.
He's a PO3.
He's a PO3 to begin with.
So the point
He was
is
the
that
lateral
we were
hire.
prepared for replacing a PO3 to begin with.
Agreed.
That's my point.
We were prepared. The question is, so now the question is, so since it all worked itself out and we had a retirement, do we want to stay even Steven as to where we were before he deployed? Or do we want to go ahead and hire another officer and increase our police force by one?
I think we're having 300 homes a year built, and we've got the budget. We should do this.
Lisa, can I hear from you?
Okay.
That's my thought.
Yes, I think that we're wise to step this incrementally rather than try and do a bunch of hires all at once, especially for just the learning curve. I'm glad that we're talking about bringing someone on who's already got some experience. But I think that we budgeted for this. We know we have growth coming. This isn't adding another officer for adding another officer's sake. This is going to be incremental, increasing population as well as need for enforcement.
So I think,
with all due respect, we keep hearing from colleagues that we have, you know, that there's some reason that we're saying we don't need more police. Absolutely, I can justify today that we add 5 more police. The question is, can we afford it? You know, and so if just because it's in the budget doesn't mean it's the best use of our money when we have other priorities. Is there? I don't want to say that police is in any way second, it's not, but are there other places that suffer even more, or that we cut short because we knew that there was a possibility that we would not be able to do this because it would naturally open up. So it's not that I have anything against this. I'd love to be able to say, hey, let's just hire our traffic unit today. It makes sense, probably be good for the city. The question is, can we afford it? And what impact is that? Just because it's in the budget, what are we still giving up to make this happen?
Do we need to talk to Steve?
See, for me, I would like to see a plan as to how he'll be utilized, because it does kind of make an odd pairing. Will he be efficient? And that's my concern, I'd like to see a plan of how this officer would be utilized. If it'll just be kind of a ride along for the next, until we get the rest of his team, I don't think that's a good use of funds. But if there is a plan set forth that says he will be effective because, then I'm in favor of going along with this. But until I see that, I don't know.
Well, like I mentioned, he's gonna work on both crews. We deploy him during times it would be high traffic. You know, the whole idea would be times when you got peak traffic, accidents, you know, citations, all those kind of things, right? So we would deploy him on both of those. He would benefit both crews. And he would be deployed at times where we would have statistics to show, hey, these are good times to deploy traffic officers. You know, he wouldn't be a ride-along for both of those crews by any means. And he would benefit both crews in the fact that you could, by taking accidents and citations and handling some of those things, the other officers can go and do other proactive efforts, and you get a benefit to both. And he would benefit both crews, not just one.
Okay.
So you get, you know, a benefit to both sides of those houses.
And the thought that this could have been employed by the police to get an extra officer, I think is just unfair. I want to say it's either good planning by us or it's dumb luck by us to be in this situation where we can get another officer now within the budget we have. I think it'd be a mistake not to do that.
Chief, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to make sure that we're clear. So what Austin is explaining, I think, would be a good use of this officer. So if we had the extra and we put him to a traffic position to be able to kind of experiment and see what that was like so we can give you guys data. But what we have to understand is that in reality, what matters is the person that we hire. So if as an example, if you say tonight, look, you go ahead and hire this position, if we hire someone with no experience, they will not hit the road until April, and we would not have a traffic person working until that person was off FTO and working on their own. So a lot of what you're asking, Councilman Savage, is it's dependent on what the hire is. And I just want to make sure that we understand that, because we're not going to be able to dedicate that person to pull him off the crew, dedicate it to this if we're waiting for someone to graduate the academy and then get off FTO, which, as Austin said, is going to put us sometime around April.
And to that point, does that mean that he's all, you know, we wouldn't even get him on the road till April? Our budget turns over in the next couple of months. Are we not just hiring him for the next fiscal year anyway, just a little bit early? So I'd rather put him in the next budget and utilize this money. Call it dumb luck if you will, but my argument at the time that he left was dumb luck probably is gonna happen. Just because about the ratio of how this works itself out seems to be, whatever you know, call it dumb luck, it seems to work itself out. But now that it has, I'm concerned about the best utilization of this money, and because we don't have to do this.
Let me just kind of poll the council. Lisa, hire or no hire?
Hire.
Dave, sounds like you'd postpone?
Postpone till the coming fiscal year.
Okay. Jordan?
I think if we can get a PO3, then it's worthwhile to try and get them in. I'm actually hesitant to try and settle for a PO1 because I would rather hold out for a PO3 and maybe it's open longer and maybe we don't end up using it until the next budget year. But if we can get someone that can actually make a difference now, I would prefer that.
We just don't have control of this.
I know you don't have control over that, but you can keep the position open longer until you get what you want. So I see your point with the PO1 because we don't get them for a year anyway. So if we can keep the opening open until we get the people we want, I guess that's kind of where I would like to go. Get a PO3, PO2 that can make a difference now. Whereas if we're just going to be paying someone to be trained for the next year, I just kind of like to try and hold out.
That's a strong maybe.
That is a strong maybe. But I do think we need more. I do think the police needs help. I want to make sure you guys have the staff you need to keep you safe. But I just prefer not to settle.
Well, and mind you, like you said, the PO3, we would, when we talk about the traffic piece, we would put that in, and that's not, we don't have to wait for that one to be trained under that dynamic, if that makes sense. I mean, we have PO3s available, depending on the hire that comes in. We don't really, whether we leave it open for 6 months or 2 weeks, we don't have control over who puts in at that point. You're really giving what you have.
And if it's a PO1, it's not that we're not paying them till April.
Right.
They're just not ready to hit the road.
We're paying them now, they're just not on the street.
Yeah.
Right.
So
But they're in the academy.
Okay, I say higher.
I say hire and we'll trust you.
Okay, Well, we have a strong 3 and a maybe and postpone. So you have your watching orders. All right, let's go ahead. Thank you, Lieutenant. Appreciate your input.
Thanks.
And council, thank you for giving us your input back. This was definitely something you asked us to bring back. I want to thank the staff for catching that. Planning items, I'd like to change the order here. I'd like to go 2, 3, and then 1. Noah, can we do 2, 3? Let's do Edgewater Park subdivision, that discussion, and a petition to amend section 5.
Use 2 adapters here. It's like Legos. Adapter die. Alright, let's see if this works. Oh. Drum roll, everybody.
That was anticlimactic.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah. I wasn't patient enough.
I was trying to give you a room shot.
It took time to get through 4 adapters to get.
Yeah, seriously. Okay, we have received an application from Monterey Properties, Alan Prince. He's here in the audience for preliminary plat. My goal will be to share some details about the project and what the Community Development Department's role has been so far, and then of course the applicant will be here to answer any additional questions. So this property is on Bluff Road, 51 lots proposed. Planning Commission has reviewed this item. They are providing a conditional approval, recommendation for approval. There were some staff comments, they're in the packet. There were 7 of them as of this writing last week. I've spoken with the developer and received a few more of these items, so I can go through them real quick. Hydrant moved to neck of cul-de-sac, 28-foot turning radius for temporary access road. These are all just details, minutia of the actual subdivision, but update rendered landscape plan with new lot configuration, have that now. Updated fencing plan, have that now. Add trail crossing signs, have that now. Add fire lane signs, he's provided some templates for signage, and then add theme elevation from the builder that comply with ordinance. So Planning Commission says, yeah, go ahead and pass it as long as those things get taken care of. And then the second item was that the secondary fire access is provided within 2 years of the 31st house in the development. So that's a fire code thing where they need permanent secondary access if there's over those units. They don't want it to be a temporary fire access for too long. And so I've pulled up the aerial on the screen. This is the project boundary. It's anticipated that the property between Trailside and them will develop within the next 2 years. So that's the plan. Otherwise, they could upsize their secondary access road that they have. Here, I'll show you if you want to see it. They could just turn that into a dedicated road, and that would meet that. So here's the plat. You can see Bluff Road right here on the left. Oops. And the main entrance coming in right there, and it crosses the trail. That's where the signage and stuff, that's what Planning Commission was worried about, making sure that's safe. You come in and you have stubs to future development on the south and to the west. And then there's a cul-de-sac, and they're proposing some open common space for the development. They want to build a pickleball court and a pavilion, and kind of a connector trail from the end of the cul-de-sac to the trail. They also need detention basin on the south edge of the project. That would be grassy, and then they're going to provide a pedestrian connection on the south end. Sorry, this is one look here. So you can see that'll be a pedestrian cut through, so it'll be a little bit easier to get to the park. So I feel like that pretty well covers everything. Developers here if you have questions.
This one is Dave.
My only concern when I look at this is that the cul-de-sac seems longer than what we have in our code for limits. I don't know what the actual distance is here, but usually that turns out to be about 6 units, and this one is deeper than that. So I would be concerned about, does this still meet our code?
Because the temporary fire access is there.
I can answer that, or the developer can answer that. Me?
Probably other.
Mr. Prince, do you want to answer that?
Happy to. We've measured that, of course, numerous times. It does not exceed your code. It's less than the code.
Okay, it's based on distance rather than units.
That's right.
Okay.
The standard's 500 feet, and it's like
Right.
It's close, but
It's close, but it's
within our
it's
standard.
less than the standard. May I also just throw out, because I think this would be of interest to you, in this particular instance, you've had a discussion tonight about water, and this would be one where we are giving all of the water shares. There wouldn't be any of the exchange that has been discussed any earlier. So I hope that's a positive. And then the final one would be my final point. I'll leave it to Paxton. There was some concern. There was a discussion with the council of reducing the side yard width in this zone. And you made the decision one evening to change that by 3 feet per side yard, from 8 feet to 5 feet, for a total of 6 feet. When we saw that, we decided we would do the same thing, and we reduced it again. We widened our lots an additional 4 feet. So now the building envelope where a home could be placed went from 30 feet to 40 feet to now fit on a conforming 50-foot lot. And that cost us 5 lots to do that. But it reduced the density, which I think our neighbors appreciated, and made the ability to build main level living and a higher quality of home at the end of the day. So that's the spirit we've tried to approach this project with.
Go ahead,
Corinne.
Just a question, if at the time when the 31st home was built, and there's already connections to, secondary connections to the other communities, originally you had a second pickleball court. When are you going to put that in?
I actually had a question because both plans are still in here. One of them has one of them has two.
Right,
Oh, great.
yeah.
Well, the issue was never one of the number of pickleball courts as far as we were concerned. What really caused the change was the requirement to, you're in effect pioneering the area, for lack of a better description. So we needed to loop the water lines, both the irrigation and primary, and then to create a second access out on the Bluff Road.
Right.
So that easement that comes down through there, unfortunately, is now permanent. It won't go away. What we can change, and we'd like to change, is the portion from the Syracuse Trail up to Bluff. We'd like to ultimately take that gravel out and replace it with topsoil so that native vegetation fills in. But the trail up to connect to the Syracuse Trail goes right over the space where we had intended our second pickleball court.
Okay. So also, I've noticed the difference between the first plan and the second plan reduces it down to 2 lots for bed parking rather than the 4 originally. So just wanted to.
Again, the trail, well, it was more than a trail. It would be a permanent trail, but it started off to be, and is starting out to be, a temporary road.
Right.
And so we couldn't put parking stalls in the way of where that road would go in. That was a fire marshal concern.
So we couldn't even put that in, even though they're driving across curb and gutter?
Well, if you'll remember that
if the other connections are made,
these are normal, standard lot widths and cul-de-sac widths. So where you have no homes around that cul-de-sac, there's a lot of shoulder space there to park on.
Okay, I see.
That you wouldn't have in a typical subdivision arrangement. So we felt like that kind of solved this, but we wish we didn't have to build the temporary road, but we do. We just needed to conform.
Now, along with the open space, so tell me more about the open space. What's it going to look like?
The Army, we have two kinds of open space.
I guess the one I'm talking about is the one near, the two near the trail. On the other side of the road, the gravel access road.
Well, the trail itself would not be disturbed, right? Other than placing a road initially and then hopefully getting rid of that. The trail or the roadway leading up to Bluff, as you can imagine, is, if you think about the trail, you're gaining some elevation. So to put a gravel bed, you're gonna have, you know, some shoulders, some sloped shoulders with initially a 20-foot passable, drivable roadway. That'll go back to a trail, but the gravel will still be there.
Okay, now to clarify though, you don't have to put that in until the 31st home is occupied, correct? Is that, I was in planning commission, so I understand that what was agreed upon, correct?
The only thing that we don't, that is affected by the 31st road is would the temporary status that it is originally constructed with, does that change and become a permanent status?
Okay, so you have to put it in from the very beginning, is that correct? No.
No, he's saying once they hit 31 homes
Right.
and it's 2 years later, that gravel drive then becomes,
would need to pave that and make it a full.
Okay, so you have to put it in at the 31st home, so if there's a secondary access already to another one of the communities, will this even need to be gravel?
if the community develops.
It would need to be gravelled right from the get-go, would it? Maybe not, no, the gravel trail would be. We're willing to do away with the gravel trail and put another pickleball court.
That's what I'm saying, you know, if at some point in the next 2 years and or 31st home and you get connection, then don't worry about this gravel road.
We would
and
very
this
happily
another
make,
pickleball.
we'd very happily make the agreement that if the Bastion Castle Creek project comes into being such that we never have to build that road.
Right.
We would very happily put another pickleball court in.
Bravo, okay.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a very high possibility that Bastion could build the road before those 2 years
And then,
pass.
for the rest of the open space around the pickleball courts, just tell me what that looks like.
If you're
It's, 'cause
standing.
here it's all pretty and green, but it's a different green than the other green, and so I don't know what that green means versus the other green.
This area would be landscaped, just like you'd see in East Park.
Okay.
So you can see there are trees, there's a walkway, there's.
Pavilions.
Now, this is the wrong picture, I've replaced this with a new picture.
I've got the plan here.
But it's still the same principle.
Right.
Around the pickleball courts and the pavilion and out to this common area, or out to the street, would be landscaped, like you'd see anywhere else in any other park. When you, now, this has changed, and there's a road here, so.
Right.
We are now fencing one side of that road right up to the edge of the gravel, and that becomes undisturbed.
In the future.
Well, yes, well, it would be fenced one way or the other. Even with the pickleball court, you'd still fence up because it's wetlands.
I see.
And one of the standards that they require, even though it's very marginal wetlands by their own admission, we would do two types of fencing. One is a two-rail, you've all seen a two-rail horse fence. And then anywhere where we're against the trail itself or against a lot right here as an example, that would be a three-rail fence. We talked about doing a solid fence, and we were sort of in favor of that. And the staff has asked us, would you roll that back to a three-rail because of concerns about graffiti? And I think it lessens the chance that someone's gonna go over with their grass clippings and drop them into the wetland open space, because it could be seen that they've done it.
I guess my thing is, I know all that open space, but I don't wanna have happen is it be a giant weed patch.
Oh, for sure.
I guess I would like it to be groomed in some way. I know it's not always gonna be manicured lawns, but what I don't want is to have a beautiful cul-de-sac that ends in a field of weeds that is, and everyone gets goat heads as they run by that part of the trail.
Sure, you bet. Now, the trail across here, the trail that exists now, is petitioned by a three-rail fence.
Sure.
Then a two-rail down here, a three-rail across here, and a two-rail up.
So that's all wetland right there?
This area and this area stay as wetlands.
But they can take care of Brett Mighty because it's invasive.
Yeah, so I just wanna make sure it's groomed wetlands, whatever you can do, just so I don't get a giant weed patch.
Just so.
Yeah, there should be a management plan.
Yes, managed
One of the
wetlands.
criteria in getting an individual permit, whenever you have higher than half an acre of disturbance, you have to get what they call an individual permit. And that individual permit has provisions. They wanna see an HOA in place and provisions that, as an example, if you have a dog, you're walking, a dog has to be on a leash. They go through annually and clean out the trash.
Talk about Army Corps.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all the Army Corps regulations, and
Okay.
we will.
The HOA will comply with those regulations.
You bet.
Okay, that was my concern.
Questions, Lisa or David?
I just wanted to make a comment that I think the aesthetics of this planned community are just beautiful. I love the architectural designs that you've sent, and I think that you've just done a great job bringing in kind of the feeling and the spirit of the community. So and just having listened to all of the comments, I like the idea of just kind of a maintained wetlands area, but I think you've done a beautiful job, so thank you.
I only wish the rock went a little bit higher in the designs. Some of them only have like a
Well,
foot
I'm
of
gonna
rock.
make two statements. I have the builder here with us. We have a national builder from Denver, Colorado, that will be building these homes, and they are familiar with the statutes here in Syracuse City and will certainly comply, meet or exceed those standards. So you'll be, I believe before your final approval, you'll see those plans and those elevations. And then secondly, I just wanted to point out that when this was zoned, and there was angst, of course, anytime there's change, the PRD zone permits 6 units an acre for this type of a piece of property. This is 4.5 units an acre. And if you take it down to not including the trail section and so on, it's less than that, it's 4 units an acre.
I think you guys are building a beautiful community though.
Thank you very much.
David, any comment?
I agree.
No, I'm good.
Well, good. Council, can we put this on a consent agenda?
I only want to stipulate with if the gravel road is not needed,
Okay.
second pickleball court and.
Do we have a?
Typically have that. That's a
Yeah.
Maybe put it on
That'd be in the.
Yeah.
We can add that to, if the
Yeah.
developer wants to, yeah.
Just one
Yeah, Mr. Gavin,
clarification
go
though.
ahead.
I believe what you're saying is if we never have to install the temporary road
Yes.
to begin with.
Yes.
And-
Right.
And
If
that's
you
an
have a
important
secondary
clarification. If we have to
connection-
remove it,
Well-
build it and then remove it, that's
No,
a different.
no.
I thought it would save you the cost of having to pave it.
And
I
that's-
think it has to go in regardless. I mean, there has to be something there.
That's the clarification I'm asking. Does it
Yes.
have to go in to begin with?
Yes.
Maybe I
that's-
can clarify things.
So the spirit behind that is if something happens in that first or second lot, and we have people behind it, we have to close that road, gas leak, whatever the case is, we don't have 30 people trapped.
Right.
Or 30 homeowners trapped. So we do have to have that secondary access.
And that, once that secondary access goes in down below and it becomes a
Wait.
viable subdivision,
But if-
then that would not have to be
But
built.
if that.
Well, it would not have to be paved.
So that's, let me clarify
So,
what's going on.
Up front, does
The
that
planning
be up front?
commission, and I believe the
30th.
fire marshal has said, when we first start construction, during the first phase with the first 30 lots, we do have to install a temporary secondary access. So we have to
Is that
build the
correct?
road base and the gravel road
Okay, cause
right
that's
from the
not what I
start.
got in planning commission. Or is that?
But you would save the
That's
cost
what
of
the fire
having
chief
to
said.
pave
Get the fire
it.
marshal here.
So the planning commission, what they did is they said, at that occupancy of that 30th home, it has to be up, ready, and available for use. So if you, the planning commission was okay with 30 people, 3 homes being trapped, if in case that does happen on that first or second lot. So we would have to make a determination how to egress those people. But the code, IFC, says 30th home, anything bigger than 30 homes.
Right, and that's what the argument was, is that if they could have 30 homes built without a secondary access just outright, then they wouldn't have to do that until the 31st home.
That's my understanding.
But that's when it would have to be paved as the 31st
So-
home.
No,
So
it
no,
would
so
have
2
to
years
be
after
put
that.
in.
There's 2 years after the
Okay.
30th.
It would just have to be
home.
usable by the fire
Secondary
department.
emergency
So
fire
it
access
might-
is just gravel.
And so within the building of 30 homes, if this comes online here or here, you don't need to even mess with this road at all, gravel or otherwise.
I like that.
And it would get a pickleball court in its place.
If we never have to install the
stalls.
secondary access road,
And more stalls.
we'll do a second pickleball court.
And we can just, we've got a development agreement with this, if you're okay with that, we can just add it to the
Yeah, sure.
agreement before we come back.
Perfect, thank you.
Council, again, can we put this on a consent agenda? You agreement?
I'm
Yeah,
not sure if
if
it's
it's
ready
in-
for consent.
If it's in the agreement, I'm fine, but
Yeah.
we might wanna review to make sure.
I wanna review it.
Okay, okay, all right.
Consider business item.
Okay, we'll put it as a business item, okay. Now let's go to 3. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, the city has received an application to amend our ordinances. And they've also paid the fee. And that person is Maverick. They're here, welcome, thank you for coming. They are here to help me fill in anything that I'm missing. But on their application, they of course have a store on 2000 West and Antelope. They would really like to be able to sell beer at their store. And apparently there's only two stores in the whole state, 2 Maverick stores in the whole state that doesn't sell beer, we're one of them. So as my role as community development director, I of course want to retain businesses and I want to increase sales tax. So this could, but I know that there's a lot more that goes into the alcohol sales as a community, so that's why you guys need to weigh in and decide if that's appropriate. But in order for them to sell beer at that location, we need to amend our ordinance concerning the proximity to the park. This too close to the park.
Who starts on this one? I don't have an agenda.
Doug. Well, as I read through this, all we'd be doing is matching the state's code, which seems to make sense to me. What I really want, I know this is beyond this, is for you guys to get a bigger Maverick somewhere, a big new one. But I would support matching the state code. I think that makes life easier for us.
Question, are we kind of in this situation because when they were first built, this was prior to our alcohol ordinance in general? We didn't have one, I remember that day. Not that I, abide, but whatever.
Maybe I can weigh in on that. So the state code used to have, for off-premise beer sales, they used to have a similar proximity to like bars and other
Right.
things. The state has since said, the state's not gonna mandate that. Local governments can still keep that if they want to, but you don't have to. And so that's changed since we adopted the alcohol code. So the question is, are you okay to sort of adopt the state stance of, we'll allow off-premise beer sales even in closer proximity to these locations, or do you wanna reduce it, or do you wanna keep it the same?
And that permit that he's saying, that's just the ABC talk for like a grocery store or convenience store. Off-premise
Right.
means that you don't consume it on-premise, it's not a bar.
And only beer, no alcohol or wine or other.
Can we go to page 69 of the packet, Noah? Because this is what confused me, because, so what are these 600, 200 feet numbers? What is 5.20.200 qualifications?
That's our code.
That's our current code.
So based on our current code, it looks like they're okay. Except for the fact that this cuts this corner ever so slightly.
So,
The way the code says it's, I just outlined the park, but the way the
Sure.
code says, it actually says property boundary.
Right.
So this is technically the same property boundary, so it's well within there's 2 measurements. It has to be for community locations such as a park or church or library or something, you have to be 200 feet, that's a crow fly. So that's a violation, like you said, barely. And then as a pedestrian would walk, which is on a sidewalk, so even though a pedestrian might cut through, it's just not how they count it. So you're good there, but here, this is one parcel, it's kinda hard to tell, that parcel line starts right there, so you would be in violation of that right there, within closer than 600 feet. So according to the proximity locations,
But like Paul was saying, we can grant a local variance because the state's, is what happened is back, whatever this was, we copied the state's language, and then since the state's changed, so in saying that we're just conforming with the state, then that gives us the option of doing a local consent.
So you're saying that the parcels for the police station are on 2 different parcels?
It's kind of funky, yeah. If you look at the actual parcels for the community center and the police stations, the cities, just owns all the land, it's kind of weird.
Other
That's a different
options, you could
conversation,
also,
though.
since this is your, the state has basically said, local government, we're gonna give you control over the off-premise beer, so if you wanna have proximity, that's fine. You could also pick which community locations, so if you're okay with parks but not schools, or churches and not parks, or whatever you wanna do,
So
you
our
could
parks-
change it if you want to.
You're already not allowed, or
Yeah.
you're not allowed to consume alcohol in the parks.
Right,
Yeah.
already.
And so, this kind of seems a little redundant. I'm actually in favor of granting them this, and as far as this, I'd actually move to kind of, well, I guess I can't make a motion, but I think we should just echo the state's code. And the only time I really see an issue with someone picking up and taking it somewhere, I mean, I think that's covered. Now, if this were a bar, I think I'd have a very different response, but where it is pick it up and go somewhere else, I don't have a problem. So I'd actually.
Doug, how do you feel?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think we do this a lot in our code, is where if we just try to mirror the overarching code, it's a lot better. And then when it changes, ours automatically changes with it.
Lisa?
Sorry, it takes a minute to unmute. I agree. I say we go with the state code. We're not talking about introducing something new. We're talking about just evening it up with the rest of the state and deregulating some of our little nuances here and there. And I think that especially with us already having it, it is a pick it up and go somewhere else kind of situation where same thing, Smith's and Walmart and any other stores like that. So I think it's fair for Maverick to have the same opportunity.
David?
The state code makes sense. I really never really understood the parks issue as much as I did. I completely understand the code that as it relates to like elementary schools, but that doesn't seem to apply here. So I think that our code, rather than be written to be exactly as, should be written to say whatever the state code is.
Okay. All right. Paul, can you help us there?
Yeah, we've got draft language. I think this should just go to the next business meeting and we can bring it back.
Let's bring it back. We'll bring it back for discussion and approval.
Okay.
Okay. Sound good? Okay, now let's go to number 1.
Where are they gonna find room for a beer cave in that already small store?
Well, can we answer?
Talk to me more about expansion.
Well, so I'm Holly Robb, I'm with Maverick
You're
Government
gonna
Relations.
get so much more business, you're gonna need a bigger store.
Yep, exactly. And this is Eric Dowling. He is our category manager for alcohol, and we would need to expand that store. There is some sketches right now where we would make do with putting it in some doors currently, but then we would apply for a permit to expand out the back some way or somewhere.
Looking forward to your new expanded Maverick.
But that is one of the biggest requests I get, is they want a bigger Maverick.
We would love to get one.
You'd be amazed at how many people have talked to me about that.
Well, this store's been here for 30 years, so it is time for a new one.
Great, thank you. We love having you in the community.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Dave, no, let's go to mixed use.
Okay, this is a continuation of a long discussion we've been having about the mixed use zone. If you remember, the city council is directed planning commission to create some language. So we've been working with them, then we passed it back. The last time we spoke about it, we heard some concerns about context of tapering and being appropriate next to their surroundings, and also the amount of commercial, or when we're okay with the building that's all residential or when we are going to require the mixture of uses. And so in this latest draft, I hope I've addressed those concerns. I've added some language saying that the density needs to taper down as it gets close to existing.
Where was that? Because I saw where you, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, continue, but I'll ask questions.
I will show you in just a sec. Let me finish my thought. So hopefully I've addressed the context, and I'll show you where it is, and we can read it. And also the other one was for just residential buildings. We've talked about making it only available interior to the site. So if they are on frontage, they have to do mixed use. And so that's what the language says. If they're on a corner or frontage, they have to have mixed use. And then it straight out says 100% residential projects are not allowed. So it's very clear that we're not interested in an excuse to do apartments. That's not what this is. So let me show you where it's under development standards and density. Unit densities and housing product type shall be distributed on site with sensitivity to adjacent development type and density. Units per acre shall be tapered down when near property boundaries of single family development. Density is form based, no minimum units per acre. So this is the units per acre, but also the product type. So, you know, maybe it makes sense if it's a larger development to have townhomes next to the single family homes and then go into an apartment building rather than just having an apartment building right next to it.
I guess my only thing would be to clarify that by tapered down, I actually mean that it has to be of a density similar to what is adjacent. So I don't consider condos next to an R1 sufficient tapering.
Okay.
So it would actually, you'd have to go from an R1 to maybe to an R2 type of density to an R3 type density and graduate, as opposed to, we've seen developments in the past that had, you know, a big lot next to 15 small lots, and we said, well, they're still single family homes. That doesn't do it for me.
Okay. So when it says sensitivity, maybe change it to like the same.
Yeah, it needs to be equivalent zoning or maybe one adjacent similar zoning.
Are you talking about just on that building closest to that?
Mm-hmm. And then, but then now you've got, so let's say that we're next to an R1. So the lot next to it would have to be either R1 or possibly R2, and then the next section in would have to be R2 or R3 until you graduate to a condo.
This isn't, that's definitely not mixed use.
No, but it's actually similar to a proposal that we received from another company recently. They said this is what works the best, is because you avoid the conflicts with the neighbors. And so I think it's okay to at least ask them to do some graduated tapering.
So what about areas where you have R1 and right next door is commercial already?
Well, they already have to have a whole mitigation zone for that.
So I agree with this concept. I don't know what the right word is because or the wording, because part of why I wanted to do this is because it leaves options open, and we can look in that, you know, something right here by Walker Estates and on Antelope may need to look different than something by Family Dollar on Antelope.
Mm-hmm. That's why we're.
And I think that's what you're saying.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't want to put too many stipulations on it.
Yeah, we generally don't have a lot of R1 right next to major arterials, but if there are, we have to be sensitive to them.
Well, I'm just thinking of like next to Walmart, for instance, on the backside of that. Okay. Next to R1.
That's not R1, back behind them.
It's
like R3.
Homes. Just so I understand what you guys are asking.
They're single family homes, so yeah, they're R3s.
Are they R3s?
I think that is R1
R2 anyway.
But I'm curious. But yeah, the intent is to taper it, and I'm happy to do however you guys want. But I want to be able to understand what you guys are asking, though. So are you saying that if it goes right up against the single-family development, are they gonna have to do single-family homes in their development?
That's what I've asked.
I don't agree with that part.
See, I don't agree with that.
Either that or they need to have a adequate buffer zone, which is green space. What I don't want is an apartment building that's 3 stories high,
Totally.
right next to a single family R1.
And we talked about graduating the size of the building accordingly too, so it would be next to, no matter what size of the single family lots are right next to it.
Could I artistically
But
read?
so next to Smith's though, you already have townhomes over there.
Then that's not a problem.
Right, but I'm just saying that there are differences no matter where you
But
go.
what you're gonna have is, if you're putting in really high density next to R1s, I just wanna be sensitive to those neighbors.
Well, and that's what the word says, so maybe that's the right word. I mean,
And it's all
sensitivity.
based on.
But how do you?
It's form-based design anyway, so.
I know.
So that's the point of it.
Can I read the height and see if that?
I'm actually want this for more of some of our other zones that are PRD and RPC. This one, maybe it doesn't fit, but I would like to see that type of wording move into those RPCs and PRD zones as well.
This is more for.
I know, and that's why I'm saying maybe it doesn't fit in here, maybe this is sufficient here, but.
Let me also read this other section and sort of point that out. Maybe that'll help alleviate some of the concern too. It says building height, a maximum height of 35 feet from ground to the top of the roof structure. Buildings located adjacent to existing single-family detached homes shall be a maximum of 2 stories and or 30 feet, whichever is shorter. So you have to taper the height down, and we also add the other sentence that says.
So it sounds like we've got it in this one, and I read that, but I was just trying to, based on our conversations that we had the other day.
You're being careful.
Is we need to make sure that we are sensitive to those neighbors, because we don't want neighbors to feel like they need to be on the road with picket signs to be heard. And we wanna make sure that we are being adequately sensitive to them and make sure we do have that tapering is well enforced. And if we're putting a apartment complex next to a farm, for example, I think we need to mandate some type of open space between apartments and agricultural or something like that.
With this 30-foot height, I think it covers that. Well, and our ability to be able to approve it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where we get what I'm
That's
asking for.
what we asked him to do in the first place, was form-based for that very reason.
But I do think that we need to look at this for our RPCs and PRDs.
Additionally, just as a reminder, with the process that's in this code, people would need to bring in a site plan with the zoning application,
Right.
so you'll know what they're gonna build, and
Form-based
that's part of the
right from the
approval.
beginning.
But the
you know.
issue, I understand that, but the issue is they're gonna say, well, I've been working on this for 2 years and now you're stopping me, and then they get mad at us. And so I wanna avoid that scenario, because that happens every time. They try and guilt you into approving their design, and that really irritates me.
I guess your response can be, that was the game that you signed up for when you tried this, I mean.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So what do you guys want me to
High
do?
risk.
I think I'm okay with it as is, as long as we make sure that, I would like, if you can strengthen that just a little bit, that it really is required and not just a recommendation as far as the sensitivity to the surrounding areas.
Let me get Lisa and Dave to chime in here on this point. Dave?
I'm really tired of talking about mixed use.
Tell me how you really feel.
Okay. This has been before the planning commission for our requests, and they gave us the document.
Right, I guess.
Lisa, how do you feel?
Well, I'm not, tired of talking about it. I think we've done really a lot of work on this. I think what we're trying to go towards is, are we gonna discuss it some more? Are we going to discuss it with changes? We've got a 5-to-1 recommendation for what we have so far from the planning commission. So, unless there are any really big conditions to it, then maybe we move forward with whatever changes we want made. I think it's a good plan. I know we've gone back and forth over what if we want to have towering infernos coming, I shouldn't call them that, just a towering structure coming over us and encroaching on our streets, and we don't want that to happen. So with it being form-based, I think we'll be really careful, but we do need to give the developers an idea of what we have in mind and what would be acceptable so that they don't have this feeling of I'm playing a game and it's gonna be gotcha in the end. So, we wanna work together really well and provide something, some community that blesses everyone. So I think with this recommendation from the planning commission and having addressed the concerns Jordan just mentioned that we've all had over the last few months, I think it's a good plan.
So I want to throw out a situation here, and just because now's the time rather than after we adopt it. You know, there are some parcels in the city that might be fairly small, and the idea of mixed use is to bring both, you know, a mixture of uses in close proximity to each other. If I'm not mistaken, the language here requires it to be on the same site. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So what if you have an example? Let me give you a for instance, right? We've got an undeveloped piece of property south of Smith's on 1000 West. We've also got an undeveloped commercial property just south of Warren's, and they're across the street from each other. Would we be against if someone proposed to do all residential on the east side of the street and agreed to develop that parcel on the west side of the street as commercial?
I'm really concerned.
Is that considered mixed use?
That up. I'm really concerned that what you're gonna do is open the gate to say, let's start counting existing commercial. Yeah, I mean, I know that's not what you just said, but I'm worried the next step is somebody says, can I count Smith's as my commercial and just develop apartments?
Well, no, the difference would be there is no commercial there on that vacant lot.
So they're adding commercial to the city.
It's a vacant lot, yeah. And
because what's made me tired of talking about this is the initial discussion all centered around how we were going to find a way to benefit the city with more commercial development by giving up something that would give us a greater benefit. And it seems like the focus of the discussion has shifted all to what we're going to give up in multifamily and very little about what we're going to get back in commercial. And the commercial is the driver for me. That's what has to happen. And so I hear what you're saying. Let's say the developer purchases both and it's no longer contiguous because you have a street in the middle. In theory, that works, but I really see it as a stepping stone to future arguments of, hey, just start counting the commercial we have and let me develop apartments.
Dave, I think the reason why we're not discussing the commercial is because we're all comfortable that that is the big component of this and it's worded correctly. And I think the only way that the argument you're scared of happens is if this code was changed down the line.
Which we don't have control of that happening,
But
future councils do that.
I think to answer your question of if you put commercial on this corner, is it okay to build just residential on this corner across the street? I personally am, I mean, it would have to be, I would have to look at that, but right now, my initial blush would be no.
I have to say though, the problem is that if you put a commercial element in that smaller area, then you're just creating a traffic problem for the people who live there.
Or it could be in a space that's not really commercially viable, you know.
You know,
you're forcing commercial on a parcel that may not be as viable. It was just it's a situation that I see out there because we do have undeveloped parcels in our commercial areas, and they are in close proximity to other areas that aren't as commercially viable. So it's just something for you to consider. I'm not pushing it.
Like I say, I don't think I'm not putting anything in the code that says no way that I will never approve that, but it better be pretty awesome form in order to say, yeah, that's okay.
Those diagonal crosswalks across through the intersection.
Oh no.
Those were a pain in the neck.
Lisa was trying to say something.
Lisa?
Yeah, I was just going to say some of those areas, though, you've got to really take into account the width of the road as well. Does it even support I mean, does it support that many extra cars coming on? Whereas when you're talking about Antelope, we have several lanes that we're dealing with, and maybe, you know, the state allows us to cut certain areas, but when you're talking about adding that much onto one lane roads, then you did just cause some havoc there. So I thought our mixed use was going to be specific to Antelope, and where else were we discussing it?
On SR 193.
Okay,
But-
so
Adjacent
that's why
to-
I say the east and west of, south of
West Davis
Smith and stuff, those are more, you know, that's your 1,000. That's a different road altogether.
And you got your West Davis corridor as well.
Yeah, I mean, our preference here is gonna be contiguous, but if there are little spots, but generally, a smaller lot, most of these are like several acres in size. I gotta think that, as far as viability along an arterial, I think, I'd have to see it.
Yeah, and I wanted to bring up now, cause as it's written now, you couldn't do that.
You could
Right.
not?
You could not.
Could not.
And so it's
Because
better to
it
bring it
has
up
to be
now and say,
included in
yeah,
it.
we don't want that, and leave the ordinance as it is, or change it now
Or
versus
there was
later.
that proposal a while back where that was part of that parcel behind Smith's, part of possibly some over east.
On Antelope.
Yes,
Mhm.
on Antelope as well, and there was more of a townhome over here, but they would have the shared amenities.
Yeah.
I mean, the fundamental issue here is we don't wanna give up, storefront access to the arterial.
Right,
Right, and that,
I agree.
and the reason I bring it up is it does give more flexibility for us to get commercial. Because someone could do residential nearby, but get that commercial up front where you want, but it's a separate parcel. Just thought I'd bring it up now because now's the time.
Well, my feeling about that example specifically would be that it doesn't have the kind of walkability, and I know it's close to the intersection, but it doesn't have the kind of walkability that you would have if everything's on one side of the road. However, what I'm cognizant of is that every property is unique, and we need to leave our options open a little bit, and especially as more development encroaches down to where you have some very unique individual properties, I think we're gonna have to maybe consider things like that.
I think it's best to not try to encompass all scenarios,
To start
so.
without it.
Let's
So
try this
leave-
first and see where it
leave
goes.
without it, not complicate, muddy the waters.
Yeah,
Let's-
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm okay to creep up on it, like I've said before.
Well, you may never need it, it's just, but
Thank you.
I could see that happening.
Council, where do we go with this?
I think it's actually ready to go in for a vote. Like I said, my only thing would just kind of make sure that we are clear on that
Try to
we
massage
do
it.
want it to be
Right,
very sensitive, not just sensitive, but very sensitive.
No, let's put this on the business meeting
Yeah,
for
we're ready to-
discussion.
Right.
The word very.
Let's put this on the.
Extremely.
Okay.
With review,
Savage one.
of course.
With review, yeah.
You don't go that far.
Robert, would you wanna talk about Public Works, and then Chief, you wanna get ready, I'm gonna move you up. Sure.
I actually think we should try and push him off during the meeting.
Month of anticipation.
So, Robert, let's talk about Public Works.
Yes, so with the field subdivision that was approved, they will be constructing a portion of 2400 West. From, it's kind of a south section, so from about where our parking lot is at Public Works, going south, and getting to their subdivision, they would have to construct that portion road. Obviously, a lot of our, the west property line, Public Works, abuts 2400 West, what they would build. I just wanted to put something in front of you to say, we are gonna have some kind of impact. What do we want to do? I'm not saying this is the way it has to be done.
Right.
I'd like to just get your input to see is what you think we ought to do. But I'd like to just be a little ahead of the game before it actually happens, so that we know what direction we're gonna aim to get an end result.
I like your proposals, I mean, and we just need to prioritize what we can do and what we have the monies to do.
Yeah, I don't think this all has to happen all at once at the same time or anything like this. If this is the direction,
Right.
you know, that works, that you like, then.
What would you state as a priority, the RV dump station moving or the road?
So,
Both.
the road.
The road.
The road, for sure. We do get a lot of users on the RV, it's pretty amazing. Most of
And
it's
blocking your
Sunday,
access, that's a problem.
Yeah, it'll queue up on.
That's what I'm wondering,
on Sundays.
is could we do one or the other right now that would solve your problem for the next little while, and then,
Or like one this year.
can we phase it?
Absolutely, we can phase it,
Absolutely.
and we can look for ways to do it.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, see, the north section of the roadway, anyway, north of the parking lot, the fields would not be constructing any of that 2400 west anyway, so that can wait.
Oh,
Right,
okay.
until, if a development were to happen, north of the fields, then that section of 2400 west would need to have something done with it.
Okay.
But we're looking at, just being able to access our site, potentially just moving our gate from the, well, it's kind of in the northwest corner of the fenced-in yard. Just moving it from one corner and go straight out to 2400 west. That would allow some of the bigger trucks and trailers to get in and out a little easier. So, give me your thoughts.
I will say that I would trust you on the priority, and what you need first, but the RV dump is it's not something we have to have in our city, but it's something that a lot of people ask me about, and I'll say, well, we have one. We do. And so to hear that it's already that busy makes me happy, and thinks, yeah, we need to move it and make it better like this, but.
Maybe put up a sign that says RV dump that way.
Okay. My only question is that with this fully fenced, do you need a second gate somewhere?
So we do have a gate right where you circled it, on the east side. There is a gate there.
There's a gate already, okay,
Yeah,
cause it was all, I just thought the whole thing was
And
gonna be cement.
we would keep that.
You would keep that, okay,
Yeah,
good, cause you don't want just one.
See, maybe with the RV dump, if we get, the development we talked about,
Especially
maybe we can kind of
around the whole
coordinate
building,
those,
too.
and maybe if they can get them to move it.
Lisa and Dave, any input?
Yeah, I
You can
was
go
gonna say,
forward and
it's
never
something
reverse.
that we can
Great.
do around the same time that we talked about doing the maintenance, shed, or, park and rec kind of thing that we've discussed. Would that be an easier time to do it, or is that something that needs to be taken care of now?
Cause their site would be where?
Theirs would be a little to the north.
We haven't actually finalized where it would go.
Well,
Right.
initially
We were
it's
looking at-
discussed
We don't know if that affects it.
Yeah,
of the arena.
We were looking at north of the equestrian arena.
I don't know if that really,
It could go south of the equestrian arena.
Also,
Or
but
it could go in
thinking
place
about
of it
the,
if you decide to
move it.
where
Right
the
on
50
top
acre
of it.
park will be, it will be really a good location in the future.
So we haven't finalized that yet.
Okay.
So, yeah, whatever you do with the parks facility can be separate from whatever you do here.
Right, absolutely.
But we're wanting to, allow for, we don't wanna, sabotage that ground either, so that you can maximize whatever use you do to that ground north of the parking lot. The only thing we, had suggested is maybe a future potential stub road that's north of our parking lot that would access the property to the east of the public works. It does have some limited or will have limited access once West Davis goes in.
It looks like it's already a dirt road there.
It is. We use it for larger vehicles, snowplows,
Mhm.
fire trucks that
Coming
come
back
in,
around.
circle around to fuel up,
Okay.
and come back around, so they don't have to make those tight turns.
See,
So
that's
it would just
really
keep that,
smart.
it's road-based millings.
Okay,
Any other questions for Robert?
let's just prioritize it and see what we can budget. I mean, who knows?
I don't think this has to be an immediate thing, but I think it's something
It's
we'll,
good to get on, like, a
we'll
5-year
look at,
plan.
and we'll probably, revisit it maybe in a retreat or something, so we kind of.
These are all good ideas, and I'm happy to do some of this stuff, but I'm concerned that we just, keep adding up the costs when we know that we've got things we haven't funded, like what was just mentioned, the park maintenance facility. I'd rather that we were a little more conservative and put some money towards that we know we need. You know, we could keep spending ourselves into a position we could never afford the park maintenance facility.
So
But these would be different funds,
one
though,
nice
wouldn't
thing
it?
is we wouldn't compete with that. So the funds we're looking at is maybe some building maintenance, road impact, definitely road impact for 2401 West.
Yeah, there
And
is.
then sewer storm and culinary. So the only thing that may be just kind of unknown, and it wouldn't have to happen now, but in the future, is a concrete wall around it. But for that matter, Dave, yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate you adding in that, the cost, or at least estimated costs in there, and where they would possibly come from. That really helped.
Okay.
The important thing is to look down the road. That's just what we're doing.
It's much better to plan and try to get things taken care of than be behind the eight ball. So
I just want to know which direction to aim, and it sounds like this is okay. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Now, this horse has been dragged out of the paddock 2 or 3 times and never been able to run.
You know what? You ready for the anticipation here?
Woohoo! Go, go, go! We could do a cheer.
Okay, and I have to say, I have 7 people waiting for me to go back to Disneyland to pick them up. And is there anything that you need my vote on specifically tonight, or can I excuse myself?
It's up to
I
you.
think you can read the review, and if you have questions, you can let the chief know.
Okay, anything, Mayor, that you can see that I need to vote?
He's good with
Because
that.
we're not doing action on anything, right? We're just discussing.
No, we're just discussing tonight.
Okay. I'm so sorry. I thought I could stay longer, but I'm receiving texts and I'm the only one with the car because I came back to the house. So they're all stranded.
Okay.
Have fun.
I'm the one in charge.
Have a great time.
Right. Thanks, you
Quitters
guys.
is what that is.
Bye.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, it's like 8 o'clock
Thank you.
there. You're gonna miss the parade.
Okay, well, are we ready?
Miss the
Go,
parade.
It's here, finally, we made it.
Yay!
Cassie, it's 8:49 when she left. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh.
Well, over the last few weeks, you've seen this in the packet, so we'll just I'll move through it, present it, and then take any questions at the end. So, first thing I wanted to start off with was the mission statement. And the mission statement of the department. The key words in there: courage, conviction, and compassion. That's up at the fire station. That's on our patches. I can tell you, every one of the firefighters there right now live this. So, the objectives for tonight is just to go over the fire department expectations and how they fit with the mission statement. So these are the expectations that were set in our the vision that the meeting that we had last year, and some of our priorities there. We'll look at the 2017-2018 statistics. We'll look at efficiency measures, technology, future considerations, and then any questions at the end you might have. So the expectations, the vision statement, one of the first ones that we had was the Syracuse firefighters and EMS providers are professional, well-trained, and courteous. One of the things about, I wanted to point out on this, we are meeting this vision statement, and each one of our firefighters carry up to 17 professional certifications, which require well over 200 hours a year of continuing education to maintain. And it always seems like there's just a little bit more being added on every time. One of the other things that we do is we have our annual awards banquet, and I put up there the list of the individuals who received awards this last year, just as a reminder, and for some of those that you weren't able to attend, you can see there. So, vision statement number 2. So the Syracuse Fire Department has the equipment, training, and personnel to respond quickly. The first thing I want to do is thank the council for all their support with the equipment. We've got great equipment, top of the line equipment, provides safety for our guys and gals, and thank you for that, and thank you for the support. You can see our SCBA's in that picture and our extrication equipment that we've purchased over the last couple of years.
Next time you do a practice on that.
We will absolutely let you know.
I'm certified,
So,
right?
there you go.
You can do it. Different kind, I know.
We've also continually training. If you notice in our manager reports, we have regional training, we have department training. Our firefighters are training on a daily basis, and we also have group training monthly. So we spend a lot of time doing that. One of the other things that's important to point out is our change in insurance office classification from a 4 to a 3. And a lot of this was due to the increase in staffing that we had. It was also due to the training and the equipment that we have. So that's a good thing. So the lower the number, the better.
Oh, really?
So,
Okay.
yeah,
I didn't
absolutely.
understand that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Should my personal insurance go down?
So what they do, it's used on, the insurance company use that to help determine rates. So I don't know if you individually see it, but as a group or as a whole, that's what they use to help determine rates. And it takes a lot of
It's
things.
for the firefighters, not
So-
for you.
That's for us.
Oh, I see it as
For the
got it,
residents.
got it.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. Residents, commercial insurance, yeah, it does. It helps out everything in the long run. And what they do is they take into account the fire department, the staffing of the fire department, their travel distances, the hydrant water system, the dispatch services. There's a lot of things. It's a complex audit when they come, so.
Yeah, we've actually dropped down, which is an improvement. We've got the lower number, I think, 3 years, or 3 times in the last 5 years. We've been able to improve our rating.
Nice.
Yeah, there are not a lot of class 3, and there's even less class 2, and then your class 1 organizations are Las Vegas. I don't know if Salt Lake City has received a class 1 yet, but they have not. So even Salt Lake City, so it's difficult to get class 1 certification. But so I'm very proud of where we're at with that class 3. The next one is the vision statement number 3. Syracuse firefighters and EMS providers are part of the community and respected by the public. Very well respected by the public. And part of the community, that was one of the things that we identified that we needed to improve on. We do have a lot of things that we do for the community. Merit badge classes, CPR classes, station tours. There's a whole list of them that was in the packet.
Bike helmets weren't in there.
Oh yeah, that is exactly right. Something I did miss. So there's a lot of things that we do, but there were some items that we saw that we were lacking in, and hence the creation of the fire marshal position. With that, you'll see some new programs coming. CPR hands-only training and stop the bleed, and these are free trainings. So what we were finding with CPR is when the American Heart Association raised their rates for their cards, that we had to raise our fees for that in the fee schedule that was approved. And we've seen a decline in the amount of people coming into those classes. So we've been looking into these programs, which are free programs that we can offer free to the community a few times a year. And they're very short programs. They're only 1 to 2 hours.
They're not a certification?
They're not a certification
It's a
program,
training.
but it's a training, right? And the two things that the first responders need help with from the bystanders and from the public is CPR and stopping bleeding prior to us getting there. The third picture that you see up there is a school program picture. One of the things that we're working on with the new fire marshal, once he gets his feet underneath them and gets moving, we're going to be implementing a school safety program for our elementary schools. So there's some other things that are coming down the line with that as well. So we'll see that sometime this next year.
Will Goldie have to change his name to Stan?
No, I'll stick with Thor.
I included the fire department history in here. The fire department history was just a refresher for council members and individuals who may not know. But in 1965 is when the fire department was founded, and founded just strictly volunteers. And then moving through, I moved it through in about, close to 10, 15-year increments there. And our first full-time firefighters came on in 2002 when we started running the ambulance service, and that's where we started the 24-day staffing.
I'm just laughing because I remember when, there were several people in our neighborhood who were volunteer firefighters. And so it's great to see where you are now in just,
Right.
19 years. So.
Yeah, it's grown and going to continue to grow for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So we did have some additional full-time staffing in 2006 and 2007, and that was the last time we've had full-time operational staffing, so the firefighters on the ground staffing. We have had the full-time deputy chief and of course the full-time fire marshal to assist with the administrative side of things. But in 2015 we increased the staffing to 5 per shift, which has been great. The peer support program, which has been absolutely phenomenal. I'm glad that we got that in put into place. And then of course 2020 and beyond, so much to come. I've included the staffing, the organization chart right now. As it is now, everything in yellow is our part-time staffing and everything in the white is our full-time staffing. So we start looking at some of the statistics, look at the call volume by year. 2017 we had a total of 993 calls. They were broken down by EMS and fire, so we're right around, staying right around 65 to 70% EMS. And right around that 40% mark for fire. 2018, the calls went up 2015. We take the data, we break it down into incidents by month, and the intent for doing that is to see if there's any kind of trends. We compare it to the previous 2 years. There's really not anything that we've seen that's stuck out as a trend, so it seems to be pretty static. We also look at it by the day of the week to see if there's a certain day of the week that causes there's more emergency calls than others, and that once again also seems to kind of
Don't go anywhere on Tuesday.
Yeah. We had some busy
Just
Tuesdays.
2017.
We had some busy Tuesdays, so I don't know what the.
And don't go anywhere around, what is it, 11 to 4.
Oh yeah, that's coming up next.
Oh, okay.
Call volume by time of day. The reason why we put this in is to see if there's any trends in the time of day. It looks like right around lunchtime, commute time, coming home. But it also shows that there are incidents happening 24 hours a day. So incidents that we're being called to 24 hours a day. So I took a look at the annual call volume of all of the departments in Davis County. There is a 0 at South Weaver Fire because I did not get a response from them. So when I asked, but I took that, and I also looked at Northview Fire District and Lone Peak Fire District. They are districts, and they have, each one of them have 3 communities in those districts that are very similar to Syracuse.
So they have 3, would you say 3 Syracuses?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. They have 3, how did you classify those when you explained them to me?
You mean
the
residential?
The residential, yeah, for the.
Yeah, so there's, the League of Cities and Towns has like 12 categories of cities, and we are in the high income residential group of cities, and so for purposes of the deep dive, we're going to compare with those cities because they're in character a lot like us.
That's why we looked at Lone Peak Fire District and the Northview Fire District. Northview Fire District is the North Ogden area. Lone Peak is the Alpine Highland area. So.
Kaysville has a third again as many calls.
Yeah.
These next few slides confuse me because what it looks like is Syracuse residents are just very careful.
Yeah.
Kaysville serves Fruit Heights too.
So Kaysville does serve Fruit Heights. One of the major differences between most of these places is they have a freeway going through them as well.
Oh.
Kaysville has I-15 that they respond on, Farmington has I-15.
Okay.
We don't.
But see, West Davis Corridor will probably add an element of that, but not quite as high as
That's
I-15.
an interesting planning point.
Right. And that's one thing that
Yeah.
I'll bring up here in the future
Okay.
considerations in a moment. But yes, there are differences, and it's because our city is so much different in location to those. You know, we don't have that drive-through city, so.
Yeah, we also tend to have a relatively young population.
Mm-hmm.
But not compared to Kaysville.
There's a lot of retirees though in the Kaysville area.
Okay, sorry.
You're
At
good.
least my neighbors that are my.
Yes, this is the one that was
employees I work
interesting. Is
with.
just Syracuse residents are very healthy and very careful and don't have a freeway.
That's true, and don't have a freeway.
All of the-
But even Clinton doesn't have a freeway either.
That's a good
But
point.
we're like almost half what they are. We're
Yep.
just healthier and more
Right,
careful.
and you know, the thing is too, is when you look at those cities, you look at Clinton City, they have a larger daytime population, more commercial, so they have that daytime population that we
And
don't have
South
nearly as
Weaver
much.
wasn't
Just
actually
spread
really
out.
right.
South Weaver on that, because I didn't have any statistical
We
data,
just
so.
didn't have any data.
Right, I didn't have any data from them. I reached out a few times, but they are a volunteer, soon to be transitioning to a part-time department.
Yeah, it was just interesting that Clinton was so different than us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think where you're looking there, the difference between that is their commercial base and their daytime population. So, but yeah, I looked at it, the reason why we looked at this, the annual call per 1,000, is it kind of gives us an idea of how many calls increase we're looking per 1,000 residents we add. So we look at call volume projection. When I looked at the 2019 calls, when I put this together, we were at 655 calls. And if we average that out over the rest of the year, we'd be at 1,122 calls by the end of this year, which is about a 10% increase. I looked over the past 6 years, we're sitting at about a 26% increase over the past 6 years. Now, we did have in 2016 and 2017, in the history of us tracking the calls like this was the only year we've had a negative 2%. We did have some call volume drop off, so I don't know. I don't know what really precipitated that or caused that, but yeah, we did see about a 2% decrease. It came right back up, and so when we look at the call volume and the projection for the call volume, if you include the 2017, the 2018, where that little I guess snafu happened, we were a 4.3% increase on average per year. But if you minus that out, we're sitting at about a 7.3% increase over the years that we've got those increases, and it falls in line with where we're at and what we're on track to be. So I think by the end of the year, we're probably going to be sitting right close to that 7% increase by the end of the year. We look at mutual aid, versus 2017 versus 2018. The mutual aid received and the mutual aid given has remained about the same. The overlapping calls have remained about the same. Now, overlapping calls are anytime we are on an incident, a second incident comes in.
Do you think that the mutual aid will change when we finally get that engine?
So we're running the engine right now. So
you guys got it delivered?
No, not that one. We have a transport engine now. So
Okay.
so with that fifth person, when we had that fifth person added, that was part of the intent of doing that, was to run that engine as a transport engine, which we have.
Is that why we did covered by Syracuse 35?
Yeah.
51 was that fifth man got us.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So that's the biggest thing I wanted, and that's why I highlighted it there, because it is that fifth person coming on did help. We were able to cover more calls because of that. And because of that also, the mutual aid transports went down, which of course was a little bit more ambulance revenue coming into us instead of our mutual aid partners. I do see mutual aid changing, however, because everybody's getting busier and everybody's overlapping calls are going to continue to increase, and we're relying on each other. We do a really good job though. If anything's proven that, the fires that we've had up on the East Bench over the last several weeks have proven that really well, that we have a great mutual aid agreement and work cooperation.
Have we responded to a lot of those?
Yeah, we've been on every one of them.
I wish mosquito abatement had mutual aid. That'd be nice.
That's why you're driving Moab.
Yeah, well, they're not, nobody's paying for it though, we are paying for it, but it'll help us in the long run if we can take care of it. Anyway, sorry.
Oh, you're good. So we look at call response times. The National Fire Protection Agency, their standard 1710, tells us that we have from the time we are paged, this doesn't count dispatch time. Dispatch time is given another minute. But from the time we're paged to the time we respond should be 5 minutes, 90% of the time. And in 2017, we were at 5.34. 2018, we're at 5.17. There are a few things that cause this. Increased traffic. We had that construction on 2000. We have, I'll show you some maps here in a little bit. We have some areas of the community that are a little bit harder to get to.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things that are affecting that right now. There are improvements that can be made on our end as well, but there are things that are out of our control that we aren't able to meet that. So I looked at the average response time with the same communities, and in comparison, we're doing really well. Comparison to the other cities, so.
That's great. That's really good. I'm impressed.
I looked at the operational budgets of each one of the same cities. I was able to get South Weaver's because it's public record.
Not a zero on that one.
Yeah, it was easier to get that than it was to get call volume from them. But so I was able to get theirs. So I look at the operational budgets, and this is operations, wages, benefits, everything for the departments. And then I look at that cost of service per 1,000 residents, kind of give it a little bit different perspective of what it costs for the fire services for that.
Considering we're about middle of the road for population, that's where we're at for our budgets too. Well, especially if you have those outliers at the top.
Right.
So.
Right, and those top ones, I mean, Layton City's getting ready to build a 4th station.
Mm-hmm.
Northview has 2 stations.
Wow.
South Davis Fire has 5 stations. So North Davis has 2. So when you look at that, they're running multiple stations as well, and
okay.
Population, call volume. There's a lot of things that go into the makeup of all that. Looking at revenues, fortunately we are, other than ambulance revenues, there's not many other fire departments in Davis County that bring in wildland revenue. So our wildland revenue has consistently stayed the same except for last year because it was a busy year. So a few things that caused that was the 5th person staffing. We were able to send more out because we were able to backfill more and able to help out there. The other thing is the seasonal wildland firefighters from the internships helped out a ton. And of course there were more fires. This year there hasn't been nearly as many fires. It's been a lot quieter this year, so, but last year was quite busy. I don't think there's many places that have wildland revenue that outpaces ambulance revenue, so.
Go Dan,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Dan and Corey,
Dan
busy,
and Corey.
busy. And all the guys that come in and help cover them while they're gone.
True.
Yeah, for sure. So technology, looking at some of the technology that's just coming up and that you might see here in the future. The top left is an auto pulse machine.
So cool.
Yep. It's a machine that takes the hard work out of CPR. So
Strap it on and does CPR for you.
yeah, it does, and it does it effectively. There's a lot of studies that have gone with it that it will produce a blood pressure. It's a good machine. I have used them before, and they work really well. So they have had improved outcomes from them. So
I do have to ask, is that a cover that's over it? Do you know what I
that
mean? Like,
says life band?
yes.
That's the band. That's the band that actually
Okay.
does the squeezing.
But like, is there a disposable cover? I'm like thinking of like somebody who's bleeding.
So
and stuff.
yeah, that band is disposable.
Okay.
That band is a one-time use only.
One-time use. Okay, kind of like
And then the
your
machine
pads for
itself is
defibrillation
washable. Yeah.
thing. Okay.
Yeah, you can
Gotcha.
disinfect the machine itself.
And this is something that you have now?
No, this is
what he-
this is technology.
This is what he's gonna be asking for
Wish list,
someday
wish
because
list.
to improve service.
So in the strategic operational plan that we adopted, one of the items, the action items, was that with each biennial review, with each deep dive, the department would examine technology that's available that we could possibly benefit from.
I think this is great.
And make the service better or whatever. So that's why it's in there.
I love it.
The top right picture is an ambulance loading system, and this system relieves the lifting. So
Now,
lifting.
this comes on a lot of them, doesn't it?
No, this is in addition to. They're quite expensive.
So this didn't come with our new
No.
transport engine?
No. The transport engine does have a lift.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has a lift system that lifts the patient and a responder up
Does this
into
have,
the engine.
does this have a weight limit?
No, well, it does. It has a weight limit, but I don't think a single patient would exceed that.
Okay.
Or they would. The gurney weight limit
just
is
saying.
the gurney weight limit is 700 pounds. So
Oh.
so if we go over
Yeah, I
700
know.
pounds on the gurney,
They're not living very
yeah,
well if
yeah.
they're over 5, so okay,
That's
all right.
judgmental.
Well, no, I'm just saying health-wise, there's a lot of problems that happen.
All right, let's continue.
So anyway, this ambulance loading system takes the stress of lifting. It reduces back injuries. We did write an AFG grant for this last year, which we brought to the council. We're still waiting to hear if that was awarded. If we did get that, then there's a 10% cost on our end. They will cover 90% of that, and that's already been worked into the budget, so that would put one on each ambulance. So we're waiting to hear on that. The bottom left is Pulse Point. It is an app. This is a free app that's available to the community, and
That's cool.
people who are trained responders or trained in CPR will receive, if once the dispatch units come on board with this, they will receive a notification if a cardiac arrest happens in the vicinity of them, and they can respond and start CPR. As we know, the brain, 46 minutes without oxygen, and there's permanent brain damage, and so when we're looking at a 5-minute response time, it's hard for first responders to get there and to help minimize that. So we rely on bystanders. That's why we try to get this hands-only CPR and get the training out so that we have more bystander CPR. But this Pulse Point app, I bring it up because it is a free app that people can download, and then when dispatch centers get on board, that's where the cost is, in the dispatch centers for the program. Once they're on board, then it'll start to do that. It'll also have a map on there for AEDs, where they're located. And it will also have, it connects to the dispatching system to let people know that, hey, there's an accident on 2000 and 1700, avoid the area. So it doesn't let them know all the calls, but it lets them know some of the major calls that might be in the way. The last picture on there is some drone technology. This is technology that is starting to be used in the fire service quite a bit. But it has more than just firefighting. It can be used for wildland firefighting. It can be used for search and rescue. It's got an infrared camera on it. It can be used for disaster response. We can use that as part of a component of the EOC to send it out and to survey areas. Law enforcement can use it for accident recreation and aerial scene pictures.
They had these at the ULCT conference, and they were really neat.
Yeah, these are pretty neat. There are a lot of regulations with Hill Air Force Base and insurance and people being certified to fly them, but yeah. So those are some of the new things coming along.
You have to get permission from Steve to fly them.
That's why I said insurance.
Oh.
You're welcome. So, okay, so future considerations. Of course, increasing call volume and increasing response times. One of the things that I did shortly after coming to work here was I wanted to look and see what needs our community had as far as response times and call volumes. And so I worked with NOAA to have a map created. We took all of our call volumes and placed them on maps and tried to plot areas that we were lacking in response time that we needed to work on. We found that the areas east of 1000 West, the southeast portions of Syracuse, and the northeast portions of Syracuse, we were having greater than 6-minute response times on average to those areas. Once 193 was finished down to 3,000, that kind of took care of the northeast a little bit, got a little bit quicker to straight out and up 193. So that's helped out a little bit. But so we looked at the maps 2015. Now on this, I put the full map in the packet for you to look at, but this one I just zoomed into that southeast portion. And that southeast portion just shows that consistently, now we have a lot of them that are green, which are under the 6-minute response time or the 5-minute response time, but everything in that yellow is consistently over that. And when you look at the whole map, there's yellow and there's green, and it's kind of, I guess, splotchy throughout. And there's a lot of reasons for why call volumes are different in the core of the city as well. It could be the acuity of the call. It could be maybe it was an overlapping call that we've had mutual aid come in, so we're going to have an increased response time. It could also be a call that we were staged on. Oftentimes, if it's a call that domestic violence or a call where we need police there to secure the scene, we're staged there for a few minutes, a few extra minutes, sometimes a little bit longer until that scene is secure before we go in. But consistently in that southeast portion of the city. 2016 looked exactly the same in that area. And then we had recently added 2017 and 2018 together. And we found the same thing in this area. So it's between traffic and the distance, we're having an increase in response times to this general area. So what I did was I took and I placed a hydrant at all of the stations, our mutual aid stations. The bottom right is Ellison Park, which is the Layton Fire Station 51. The one to the left is our fire station, Station 31, and then the two above that is the North Davis Fire District, and the top one is Clinton Fire. And I took a 1.5 mile radius, which is what ISO has used, just to quickly determine what a 5-minute response time would be. Now this is just as the crow flies. This is not GIS'd by travel time or anything like that. But it shows, it pretty much shows that area, that 1,000 west and that southeast portion of the city, that it matches what our maps show call volume wise. And is that the case for every single section in there? No, it's not. I mean, it really does depend. In the middle of the night, we're going to get to that area quicker when there's less traffic. So there's a lot of factors that play into that. So after discussing this with Brody, when we got our first couple of maps, I asked him, what land do we own that's around 1,000 west that we could look for a potential site for a future station? And this was one that we identified and we looked at and wanted to just look at and have you consider in the future, right here at the Legacy Park area.
And which entrance would you be looking at? Because I'm thinking like park expansion versus, you know what I mean?
I have not even looked at that yet.
Okay.
That was one thing. I didn't want to start planning something that wasn't approved, so I didn't want to. I wanted to look at it, see if that was something that we wanted to get a little bit more in depth on.
At first blush, the northern entrance would probably function better because that bigger road, that cul-de-sac, having sirens going by your house on that cul-de-sac all day, every day.
Yeah.
Be rough.
Although their insurance rates would be awesome, right?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, and our guys are kind enough to not turn on the sirens in right by the house. But yeah, so if we place that station there and we put that
At least we have an option. Anyways.
Put that 1.5 mile radius there, that gives us some redundancy, which is great. The redundancy is good, and it also will help cover the area that we've got concerned. So.
And it'll be on the other side of the freeway.
That's the next slide. So, yeah. So, just the future consideration of a possible second station. when we discuss stations and station placement, a couple driving factors with stations are call volume and call response. And right now the call response in that area is where we would need a second station.
Chief, other land that we don't necessarily own all of it, but it's still potential is south of or southeast of Jensen Park that's owned by UDOT. It could possibly
on the
work.
east side of the corridor, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of east of the pump house.
Okay.
So it's in the same area.
Yeah, I can see that.
So the next one is the West Davis corridor. So the West Davis corridor is going to increase response times to areas east of that corridor. It's going to bifurcate the city. We've discussed that before. Not only once it's in, but during the construction, because it's been talked about that during that construction we're also going to possibly be widening 1700 between 2000 and 3000, which is going to cause a lot of response issues for the fire. There will be a decrease in response times to the north area because of that interchange. That station will be able to jump on that West Davis corridor and hit the north end of the city pretty quickly. And because we're going to have people traveling through the city, we're going to have an increase in emergencies and call volume. It's going to happen. So, and with whatever growth comes with that as well. Some other future considerations that we have is the demands for wildland deployment. The demands for that, Corey and Dan, sometimes they'll spend 14 to 16 days away from the home. Last year, Dan had over 100 days deployed.
His wife thanked me.
I've heard that. I have heard that. They spend a lot of time out there, and in order for us to send a unit out, we have to have a qualified engine boss. And to have qualified engine bosses, it takes some specialized training, and they have to deploy to maintain that. Right now, Bybee and Holman are two only engine bosses. So when they're gone, our wildland program's gone. Our seasonal firefighters are doing great. We're bringing those in. We're getting great interest. The high schools, they're loving it. This is a great program. However, we don't have enough of the full-time staffing that wants to continue that wants to go away for 14 days, up to 14 days. So some of them do, some of them will go for a little bit of a time, but right now we have to take.
Just like military service, like a guard service.
Yeah.
2 weeks a year.
Yeah, a lot. There's. I've got a couple guys that want to do it, but not enough to maintain that engine boss certification.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that we got to look at in the future, how we maintain that. And the other thing is paramedic services in Davis County. When Sheriff Sparks came in this last January, he had made comment that he was looking at the improvement of paramedic services in the county, and that may include divesting that from the sheriff's office and placing it into the fire stations and the fire departments to run. There's been a lot of discussions on that. One of the things that I wanted to point out to you, because there's not been anything that has been decided, and there's still discussions going on, but we wanted to list our priorities, and what we've told the commissioners and what we've told the county is that the service that we get has got to be equal or better to than what's currently provided. If we bring that in-house, or if it stays with the sheriff's office, or we contract with somebody else. Syracuse should have the opportunity to choose who they contract paramedic services with. We don't want to be told who we're going to use. The mill levy distribution must be fair once they decide what is going to happen with the mill levy. And then of course the dispatch services has got to be coordinated to run the paramedic services and to be able to run those borderless, to move across city borders and dispatch borders. The city to the east of us and the city to the north of us both have different dispatch centers. And so we run into those issues quite frequently. So.
We've had
Oh.
talks with the commissioners about that
That's
one.
the wrong one here.
They always say they're working on it.
Yeah, there have been
For
discussions
years.
and a lot of meetings, so.
Years.
The other thing for future consideration is of course staffing. And when we talk about staffing, the increased staffing will help solve some of the other problems. The paramedic, the wildland, all these other things. So job markets are making it difficult to hire and maintain qualified part-time staff. We are pretty fortunate. We've been able to hold on to some of our part-time staff, but we're still averaging probably 3 to 4 that are resigning and moving on. They're either getting hired full-time somewhere and they don't want to work a part-time job anymore, or whatever the case may be. So it's harder to.
What is the age population like in Davis County area for retirements? How much are you expecting over the next 5-10 years, you know?
For retirements?
Yeah, I'm just.
For our department?
What's our population like, looking like age-wise?
Yeah, so
for fire departments.
Right, so we had 3 people that were hired, well no, we had 2 full-time hired in 2002.
Okay.
So that would put them eligible for retirement in 2022.
So some of them are coming up quick.
So
then,
we have, as a matter of fact, we just looked at this. We have 3 people in the fire department that would be eligible within the next 5 years to retire.
So I'm guessing that other departments in Davis County could be competing for employers.
Right. Yeah. There is competition. There's the city to the east of us here. They've got open recruitment right now for about 6 to 8 positions that they've got on filled. So they've started including sign-on bonuses to try to get people to work. So it's a different market, and these are for full-time staff. So it is quite a different market, and it's changed. And so the part-time staffing is a little bit harder. And then Layton City and South Davis Metro, they don't use the part-time staffing anymore. We were able, with Layton City making the change, we were able to kind of take advantage of that a little bit, because some of their guys and gals who were working part-time there, we were able to pick up and bring here for some of our vacancies. So it worked out good for us now, but eventually that's going to change. It'll catch back up.
Chief, may I ask a question here?
Sure.
So my questions concerning that is, it seems that most firefighters in this day and age work full-time for somebody and then part-time for somebody else due to the nature of the hours of the job that makes that possible for them. So if we were to stop using part-timers, does that mean that we just don't take advantage of any of those people? Because you can't work 2 full-times, right? That would be impossible.
Right, you cannot do that. Yeah, that wouldn't be happening. But I think the trend is across the fire service, even across the state, is that the firefighters are not wanting to work those second jobs in the fire service anymore. There's been a huge increase with health issues and PTSD and things like that because of those increased jobs. That's one of the things that was identified by the Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance, was working a second job, that they're not getting the time to decompress. And I think that's starting to catch up to the fire service. And I think individuals they're finding second employment, but it's not in the fire service anymore.
Interesting.
Well, that's good to know, because I had no idea, and in fact, I found early on, I found it odd that so many of our firefighters, if they were full-time, they worked somewhere else part-time, and if they were part-time, they worked somewhere else full-time. So I think I'm actually encouraged that that's lessening, because that seemed to be the standard at least 4 years ago.
But that also probably decreases your hiring pool too, though.
It does. It does decrease the hiring pool. And the other thing it does is the hiring pool it does bring in are people who have been released by other departments that are probably people that we don't want to hire.
Okay.
So I think, I mean, there's a large pool there, but it's not the desired applicants aren't always there. So
okay.
Yeah, this is a trend in the fire service that's coming. That's why I say it's a future consideration. One of the things that I guess is important to bring up is to move to a full-time staffing is easier to do when your department's smaller. than it is like we've just recently seen with Layton City. They are moving and transitioning, and they're at the same time they're staffing a fourth station. So the amount of people they've had to hire full time to make that change has been quite dramatic, and has become an emergency almost to a point for them. And so that's one of the considerations, is that it's easier to do it when you're small, and it's not so much of an emergency in 10 years from now where you have to hire twice as many people. Okay, so with that being said, and talking about that, I did add, you guys have seen these before when we talked about the fire marshal position. But this is what the fire department would look like if we were to add a second station and have all full-time staffing. That's anticipated 30. I put 30 to 31 because I did put a fire inspector in there and highlighted that. That is just all depending upon what kind of growth and what kind of demand we need in that in the help for the fire marshal. But as far as that, the others, everything in the red would be anticipated full-time for full-time staffing. Of course, that would be easier to do prior to a second station as well. There would be less. If we were to maintain part-time staffing, we would still have full-time staffing for, if we were to duplicate what we have right now, we would still be hiring about 12 full-time, and then between 18 and 24 more part-time, which just makes the problem that we have with part-time, with the 24 part-time we have now, even worse.
So the difference, though, is the cost of providing benefits for full-time.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is the cost, and that's one of the things that I mean, the change is coming, and it's happening. We know the growth is coming, and so when I asked, and like I asked in our meeting when we talked about the fire marshal, is let's do this in small chunks instead of waiting for 5 to 10 years from now and coming and saying we need 12 full-time staff this next year.
When you say small chunks, does that mean there might be a possibility that we could shift to more full-time without going completely to full-time?
Absolutely.
And kind of transition over time?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's one of the things that of course can be proposed later. But that would be one of the discussions, was to slowly change that now. One of the things that when you fill, that's the hardest thing with public safety, police and fire. When you go to fill one spot, it takes multiple people to fill that because you're providing the service 24 hours a day. So
right.
You're filling one spot for a firefighter, for a fire department, and that takes 3 full-time firefighters to fill one 24-hour spot 7 days a week. So that's, oh, go ahead.
I guess maybe in your next biennial review, I'd like to see what that looks like, if not sooner. But I mean, I'm not saying tomorrow or anything, but you know, like sometime.
Maybe at the retreat.
Yeah, okay. Yes, absolutely.
We thought we were doing good with 5 guys. I mean, seriously.
Well, it's still 5 guys. It's just how many of them are part-time versus full-time.
Yeah.
I know, we have 5 full-timers. We're like, whoa, we've been doing
That's not 5 full-timers.
Okay, and then the last slide is dispatch consolidation. This is an ongoing
5 at a time, I mean, good 5 minutes.
ongoing topic.
We're blending this on a 40-minute response.
Yeah. So, multi-jurisdictional dispatching. It's become problematic within the fire service. It's an issue that the system that we're on with Davis County Sheriff's Office, our paging system, is analog.
Oh my.
Yes, it is still analog. It's almost 40 years old.
Morse code still.
They do the 2 tones. They do the 2-tone codes to set off our alerting system. So it is an older system. A lot of the other agencies, the dispatch agencies, have gone to digital. But the multi-jurisdictional dispatching is a huge issue, and it's caused delays in responses to medical and fire incidents, and some sort of consolidation is a priority.
Who can fix this, though?
The county is the only people, because it can't be done by a single city.
Well, the county won't.
It has to be a county situation.
It's gotta be cooperation.
But the problem is, can a county tell cities to stop providing the service?
Well, counties can negotiate for us, that's my thought.
That's the conversation.
Well, and
these cities use this as a revenue source.
the fire department does have options. I mean, there are 3 other dispatch agencies. Bountiful probably would be a little ways out of the way, but there is Layton City and there's Clearfield City. And I don't know how the dispatching service works on the police side. I know that Davis County, the sheriff's office, their police dispatching, their system is digital, but the paging system is still analog. So everything's running digital on the police side of things. And I don't know how it works multi-jurisdictional for them and if they have any issues. And I don't, with the amount of time they go mutual aid into those cities or help out the other agencies, I don't know what kind of issues they have. But I do know it's a problem in the fire service and it's caused some issues and hopefully we can get it fixed or potentially look at another dispatch service for our fire department in the future. So anyway, we're there. Questions?
Thank you.
That's it?
Finally, after 6
That's it?
weeks, yay!
There we go. We got it. Okay. Well,
Chief.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things you gotta bring up as we're going into the retreat, we start allocating funds, we gotta look at transitioning some of those part-time to full-times as well.
What do we want to do with the policy manual? Do you want 10 minutes to get into it?
Yeah, let's see what kind of questions are on.
Mutual aid.
Council, let's move on. Let's go back up to the personal policy manual. The personnel policy manual and.
Okay, so we send this out at the last work session for first read, give you time to look through it. Steve's put together a summary, some of the changes. I think what I want to do is just see if there, where you have questions. I'm not going to walk through every little change.
But most of it was excellent.
We reviewed this like once a year, every time I get.
Yeah.
Just
Basically,
just tweaks each time.
And
unless there's
a
something
lot
we
of
have to
tweaks,
change.
though.
And this one is a lot of tweaks.
But it all, I mean, none of it seems controversial.
No, and it's all like needed and there, I just had one, but let me see if we can find it.
Yeah, this is just a list of things we collected over time. Didn't want to bring each one individually, so they add up over time, but a lot of them are smaller. I did get a response from Lisa that said she had looked through it and didn't have any questions.
Okay. Yes, on 163, just about the statements about the abuse. It was talking about witnessing child abuse, but I would say there needs to be some sort of section about witnessing any sort of abuse to anyone besides just children. That there needs to be reporting required.
Page, which 163?
Yeah, 63.
Yeah, this is under sexual abuse policy.
Right.
And I'm sorry, what was your?
It was just that there should be a section for require reporting of witnessing an adult situation, adult on adult.
Not just children, not limited to children.
Right.
So,
If you're witnessing, you should report.
Yeah, I think it's the question. So in this, it's signs of child abuse. Are you saying that if someone has a black eye and they're an adult, that we should report it to the police? I think if you see
Does it already have that somewhere?
well, I mean, if they observe a fight, then certainly they're going to report that to the police. But if this is signs of child abuse, meaning, we see some things that make us think this child might be
Sure, I
abused or
totally
abused.
understand that.
So are you saying that we should have the same for adults if we see signs of abuse, or just active, like ongoing violence?
Well, I guess it was probably more when I read that observes signs of child abuse. So it's not necessarily just witnessing an action of abuse, I guess.
Yeah. If they see, if they witness a fight, we're going to call the police to intervene. And if we see child abuse, then that's the same thing. That's mandatory reporting.
And as far as adults, I think the sexual harassment policy is.
Right. I mean, I just would like If there's a third party, sometimes the person in the situation feels intimidated and can't report. So if somebody witnesses something happening, they should be asked to report.
I think that's the sexual harassment.
But it just doesn't say that.
Is there not a sexual harassment section?
There is.
Oh, okay.
It is
But how
above.
much can you require an adult to report on another adult?
I
mean,
think
get
you
the point.
legally can require that.
Well, no, I mean, how much do you require somebody to make assumptions about another adult? Because as Paula pointed out, it's one thing if they saw an action. It's another thing if you saw signs of possible
Right,
action.
no, I'm talking about observing, actually observing. So, like, for instance, in D, the section just above, if you observed any of that, then you should report it. That's all I'm saying. It didn't happen to you, but you witnessed it.
There is a harassment policy and it does go over sexual harassment. I think that may be what you're talking
It
about.
might be already covered. Excellent, if it is,
That's kinda what I thought.
great.
Yeah, in
I just wanted to make sure.
just above in 10.010 it talks about harassment policy and it goes into sexual harassment.
And it probably is not in red, so you probably didn't read that part, so, okay. Just wanted to make sure it's in there.
And
I didn't wanna be a pain.
It talks about harassment of any nature too, not necessarily sexual harassment.
Right.
I thought these were actually good changes, you did a good job, the marijuana section was interesting. I
Mhm.
still wonder how that's all gonna play out simply
Yeah.
because it's still a federal law.
Yeah, they're still working through
And so
it.
this is a giant gray area that's gonna get messy
Well,
someday.
they give you your own pain pills, though, that's the same kind of risk you take if you're
Well, I
taking
know.
something.
I agree, but even taking it medicinally is still federally illegal.
Yeah, so for
Mm.
DOT regulated CDL drivers,
Mhm.
it's still, you can't,
Like as
even with the.
It makes sense.
doctors.
As a DoD contractor, it is still legal for me to even, I can't even buy stock in the stuff, cause it's federally illegal.
Are you suggesting you would?
No, it's just,
Not right now, it's a terrible stock to buy, they're losing a lot of money.
they really are.
Just trying to clarify.
Okay.
Not, we haven't done any big opposition at any point.
No.
No, but I think it's fine as is, someday that marijuana's gonna have to be figured out, but that doesn't have to be in our policy manual.
On consent agenda.
I think
Can we
it
put
could
it
be
on the
on consent.
consent agenda?
Yeah.
Okay with it. Dave, are you okay with this?
Yep.
Going to consent, okay.
Excellent job. It's a lot of work.
Cassie, let's talk about voter participation areas.
Okay. I reviewed the legislation that was adopted in the 2019 session, House Bill 119. It just requires counties and cities of first, second, and third class to establish voter participation areas. We have to take action by January 1st of 2020. And the intent of a voter participation area is for signature requirements for local initiatives and referenda. So right now, if there is a local initiative or a referendum, the number of signatures that the signature gatherers have to get is based on our total voter registration for the whole city. So if we adopted participation areas, they would have to get a percentage from each of those participation areas, so it's representative of the whole city instead of
Like one area.
yeah. So I provided the map that Davis County created for us. There's 4 areas in the city. They're of pretty close to equal population for all 4 areas, and so this meets the requirement of the law. So I'm just recommending that you, as a council, take action on this. We're hoping for the October 8th meeting, but if you have more questions or discussion, or if you wanna go a different route, we just have to have it adopted by January 1st.
So,
I think it's great.
my only question is, like I noticed in some of the other cities, you know, they have fewer people in their areas. Is it just, it just has to be 4 areas, is that all it is? What determines the size of the area and the population thereof?
So the law just says that they have to be contiguous and compact and of substantially equal population. So they would take the population and like for us, I think it just made sense for them to do of the 4 areas. That was was the way that they could get more equal, but like you'll notice Layton has several more areas than us. I think it's just their population is obviously larger, cause you can see that each of those areas has more than 5,000 residents in an area. So yeah, it's not that each city had to have just 4 or a certain number, it's just that they have to be contiguous.
Yeah, it's just Syracuse B kind of ended up kind of weird because of
Yeah, the outline of
weird
that one
child property.
was kind of strange too, yeah, and then C is obviously a couple hundred less than the others. So if you wanted to look at something different where we shifted, you know, some of A over to B and then some of B over to C, I think that could work too. I think the contiguous part, it'd be hard to get B and C to match up with each other if you broke off that. Like B and C have to touch somehow, so.
Yeah, so the driving force behind this is just to make sure that any referendums that come before the voters is representative of the entire city and not
Right.
just a specific
Right.
area.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
so that's the goal.
And I think with B, even though that part in the middle is not annexed, that we all understand that it's eventually will be part of the city, eventually.
I'm okay with this in principle.
Okay.
Does this affect the precincts?
I don't think so.
It
So,
shouldn't.
yeah, it does not affect the precincts, this is a separate action, but there are conversations, underway about precinct maps, so.
But that probably won't change till the census, will it?
Right, yeah, that's not anything that's, gonna be immediate, but there are ongoing discussions about it.
Okay.
With 4 of you still online, is this something that we can do by consent? Do you feel like it?
Yes.
I'm good with it.
Dave?
Yeah,
You
yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Alrighty, Justice Court recertification, Paul, do you wanna hit that one?
Sure, so every 4 years, we're required to go through Justice Court recertification. Part of that includes my feasibility memo, which is in your packet. There are other things that our court administrator will be going through and making sure that we meet all those qualifications, but based on, when we did this 4 years ago, we didn't have any problems with certification, really not a lot has changed since then, so I don't think we're gonna have any problems meeting the state's requirements. One thing that we are required to have is the council resolution saying, yeah, we wanna keep the Justice Court. If you were to not do that, then we could look at being decertified and losing your Justice Court. Once you lose it, you really don't get it back from the state, they just, sounds like they say, yeah, we'll just keep it with the district. So, yeah, if you have any questions, I tried to do some analysis, both, you know, just sort of letting you know what the court does, some benefits of it, the costs of it. We also looked at just some financial viability, not that that's a driving factor, but I think it's important to consider. And, you know, basically the Justice Court is covering its own costs and the costs of prosecution, just from the fees that are being generated and fines from the court. So it's, you know, financially it's feasible, and from my perspective, it makes prosecution a lot easier. If I had to go down to Farmington, we'd probably just wanna contract out to some other, you know, hire someone to take care of the prosecution, cause it would take a lot more time, for me as prosecutor. But yeah, if you have any questions or you want us to talk about more things or look at anything else, please, let us know.
I liked your point about how you, said that it's better representation for your local area as well. You know, just more convenient for our residents and easier for them to take care of stuff too, not just yourself, so.
Right, yeah.
It's a great value for our city, a great asset.
Okay, Jordan, you good? Dave?
I thought based on what was written in the packet alone, we should do it, but Paul did a great sales job, now I'm sure of it.
Okay.
It will need to be adopted by resolution, you wanna put that in a consent, Pat?
Consent.
Yeah.
I don't know that we'll have to check, I don't know that we can put it on consent.
Will you check?
Yeah, we'll double check that.
Okay, do we have any public left? Is anybody here that would like to address the council? Hearing and seeing none, I will bypass that one. Let's talk about, council future items. Council, do you have anything that you, I do, I've got one thing I'd like to make you aware of.
I would like to put out a suggestion that we already made, I guess, a couple of private conversations, but
several of us went down to the ULCT convention and learned a lot of things I'd like to see on a future work session soon, just sharing, because we didn't all go to the same sessions.
Okay.
Yeah, that's gonna be one of mine.
Great. Cassie, could you put that in the October work session? Anything else?
I'm thinking I probably will write up some reports too, because there's a lot at the ULCT.
One of the things I'd like to make the council aware of is that we're looking at, the work session in November will fall on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, which is not really a super time for a work session. And the work session in December is Christmas Eve. So council, I would like to suggest that in those 2 months, for November and December, we do a mixture of both work and business in both of those meetings, so that we can accommodate both of those things and not encumber staff on those days around those holidays if we can avoid it.
So we'll just do a single session each of
Single
those months.
Not a marathon.
It'll be a business meeting, but we'll dismiss and do some work. We'll do some work too on both of them.
I would agree to that tentatively, pending that no emergencies arise and we have to deal with them.
Yes.
And let's start looking at when we can get together for the retreat and start planning early to try and get dates set aside.
We're working on that.
Cause I think that'll help us make up some of the things we can cover in those work sessions.
Yeah, we're working on that.
I definitely don't agree to the Christmas Eve off, but
There's
Tuesday
an
before,
emergency.
I don't have as much problem with it because kids are still in school, so it's hard to go too far.
Okay, anything else, council, that you feel we need to discuss?
Not this time.
Okay, I don't need a motion to declare us adjourned.
Like Robert.